establishment management in a regular organization when you have a direct report and you've got a corporate style hierarchy, but I think we're all sort of learning to go from having one boss to having 100 bosses, which is all of our peers. And what's complicated about that is that in every relationship, there is power and there is trust and there is ego. And those complicate the communication patterns of those people. And I'm already a software engineer and I'm bad at communication, as some of us might be. And so when you have 100 different bosses and you've got power, trust, and ego and competence in each of those relationships, I think it becomes a lot for people to learn how to self-manage in a DAO type organization. So do you have more of an experience with digital organizations or DAOs?
Yeah, for sure. Definitely more digital organization than DAOs. Frankly, I think the word DAO is a little bit of a misnomer. It's a little bit too constrained for the way that we use it mostly in like Web3. I've certainly been a little bit more part of like digital organizations. And with that, I think that there's this balance between, like you said, like the hierarchy and then also like being able to get decisions done quickly. And then as we get bigger, we do want to decentralize, and I think that there's different strategies you can use to do there. One of the ones that I've seen that I think works pretty well is council-based approaches, where like members of the DAO will then elect people that they trust to help run some of the business units that the org is doing. Because like you said, once you get a lot of like ego and people into the room, all of a sudden decisions can come to a grinding halt, and that's where we start to see a lot of bureaucracy. And when that happens, you start to lose effectiveness as an organization. And that's not what we want to see either. So yeah, that's kind of my take on that.
Yeah, totally. I'm wondering, since it is MCON and the logo is a pepper, I'm wondering if we might get a little bit spicy.
Yeah.
Cool. So, you know, it's hard because Peter wanted to host an honest conversation about this, but it's also being recorded and streamed, so like, what the fuck? But I'll just tell a story that when Gitcoin DAO launched, myself and Austin Griffith, who just had a baby, by the way, that's why he's not at MCON. Shout out to Austin. Yeah, let's give it up for Austin, actually. Austin and I launched this Gitcoin DAO workstream called the Moonshot Collective, which is supposed to be this R&D rapid prototyping workstream. And we got like, it was like $800,000 worth of tokens out of the Gitcoin DAO treasury, and a bunch of developers showed up, and it was just pure chaotic, immaculate conception for a few months. And we launched some software products that went well, and we launched some that went really awful. We had I'm just gonna maybe share a couple memories from the Moonshot Collective. We had a project that we greenlit that was supposed to like disrupt LinkedIn, which is a horribly big idea. And I remember like breaking up a fight between the product manager and the engineers on it. And I was like, oh shit, like you guys don't know how to work together, like you don't have team culture. We thought if we just had like tokens and a project charter and we put you all together, then you would like learn to work together. But it turns out that you ended up all hating each other, and we wasted like 100K on that project. So that was one memory. Another memory I have is that we worked on this project that was meant to be like an NFT launch experience, and basically the developer missed the deadline for the NFT launch that we were doing in February, but still charged us like 30K for the work. And I was like, all right, well, you know, I'll let it go. Like, let's wind this down. I'll give you 3 more hours to work on it. And I just found out like last week that he didn't work 3 more hours on it. He worked 300 more hours on it. And he came to me with another 20K invoice, and I was like, no, I'm not paying this. And so he sent me back a lewd picture of like a pornographic picture, and I was like, what the fuck? And so now I don't know what that guy's doing, but he presumably thinks I owe him $20,000 for work that I didn't budget for. So I don't know if you have any spicy stories, but those are some of mine.
Yeah, I think ultimately it comes down to the people that you choose to work with. Again,
that was
luckily,
my mistake. I was just like, come join the Moonshot Collective. Anyone can join.
So I have a question there. It's like, how do you verify that somebody is as good as you think they are, or as they think they are, before you give them 100K?
Yeah, well, I mean, Oh man, remember the bull market when money was just infinite and you were just like, sure, let's do a project together. So Austin, the way Austin and I worked in the Moonshot Collective was like, if you showed up and we vibed with you, then we would put you on a token stream that would just stream you tokens, and we would give you a job. And basically, you had to come back every week and claim those tokens, or else you wouldn't get paid anymore. So you were kind of like submitting a status update in order to drain your token stream, and this token stream would refill. And so basically, that was really great because we didn't have to do interviews, we didn't have to do like code tests, we didn't have to do reference checks. We could just start working with you. And a lot of the permissionless innovation that came out of that was really incredible. But then sometimes you get these like kind of like barnacle type people who will just milk the stream and not really deliver a lot of work out of that. And the way Gitcoin hires in like the product work stream is they do a bunch of interviews and reference checks. It's like corporate style interviewing. And Austin and I were just like totally YOLO in how we brought people in. And I definitely have oscillated back and forth between those kind of things, like, hey, we vibe together, I'll send you some tokens so we can start this off, versus like doing true reference checks. And the one thing I've learned is that I can spot incompetence pretty quickly if you're not shipping code, but what I can't spot until we're like 5 months in and we're already working deep together is character issues. Like if you're gonna fucking lie to me, if you're gonna build your own little fiefdom inside of the Moonshot Collective or Gitcoin, and then like, I just don't know how to spot that up front, and I think reference checks are actually a really great way to create an ounce of prevention, which is worth a pound of cure there.
Yeah, I agree with that. Is it the mic?
Is it? Can you guys hear his mic? No, you want to hold it up a little bit?
Yeah, I'll just hold it up.
Much better.
Yeah, so definitely like trying to figure out like who's good to work with, who's not good to work with. But like you mentioned, the character issues that come up after like 2-3 months of working with somebody, that's the toughest thing to try to figure out. Even with like a 1 or 2 week project that you give somebody, ultimately like they can write up a spec and they can deliver that spec, but when they start being able to like, will they be able to manage other people? Will they be able to work with other, like 7 other people in the organization effectively? And then, like Kevin mentioned, once we start getting little fiefdoms and clicks and stuff inside of the DAO, that's when things really start to go a little bit haywire, I think. And so what are some of your like biggest horror stories of that?
Oh man. My biggest war stories that I can say while we're recording. So basically, the way Gitcoin DAO works is that governance is the ultimate arbiter of who gets tokens out of the DAO. And I'm one of the biggest bag holders of GTC, which is a governance token. And so what I've basically been trying to do is to make myself as neutral as possible and as approachable by the people who are working in the DAO. So basically, one of the problems that we sort of had was that the people working in the DAO had the context, but they didn't have the legitimacy of having the tokens to decide which work streams were going to get funded. And you know, when you're negotiating quarterly budgets, which is it's on a quarterly season, having that power to like really inspect a work stream and to give them feedback is really important. So I've been trying to just like remove myself from the politics of Gitcoin, which has been really nice to be disaffiliated, and to post every quarter about where I'm delegating and why I am delegating to who I'm delegating to. That might be a circular thought, but basically, and then I have a little request form where I say, if you want power delegated to someone else that's not on my list, or you think I should up or down my delegations, then submit this form and I'll consider it. And it's been really great to find out about the up and coming leaders in the organization, because their peers will come to me and say, this person deserves a lot more governance power. But that's been one way that we've been trying to manage kind of making the people who are context and highly skilled have governance power. But I really think that it should start further down the stack. We should all have job descriptions that we understand what our roles are, and I know job descriptions are kind of boomer for this audience, but like it literally describes what your job is. And if you're not on the same page about what that is with your coworkers, then there's gonna be miscommunications. And then people have to be good at becoming self-aware, reading social signals, realizing that the real office culture that you have or a office culture comes from the back channel. It's in the DMs. It's in like what you're willing to share on happy hour with people. And the stuff that you see in the meetings is only like the front that people put up in front of you. And you have to get good at back channeling, becoming self-aware, seeking feedback out. Some of the worst people to work in DAOs are the ones who lack self-awareness and don't ask for feedback. And so, you know, the stopping mechanism is the governance and who I'm delegating to and who other like whales are delegating to. But the real mechanism, if you want to have a healthy DAO culture, is way upstream of that, and it should be peer-to-peer feedback from your peers. And that's a skill that I think we all have to learn in this space if we're gonna make it. So
Yeah.
I think peer-to-peer feedback is a muscle we should all flex.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think there's a lot of interesting ways to do like performance management, and that's a lot of like the most interesting challenges that comes with.
Sounds so boomer, performance management.
It does. It sounds so corporate.
Yeah.
It hurt me when we started to do these things called like job scorecards, but then like we did them and I was like, yo, this is good. This shit is good. Like we definitely need this. Because it clarifies things for so many other people. I mean, like we were saying earlier, like I think DAO is a misnomer. It's a little bit more of an ethos to me where we try to be open and transparent about things, about the performance of things, and also how things are going, like actually, not just what we want to sell outwardly. And part of that is like actually having standards that we're trying to hit. And if you're not hitting those standards, then we need to have an honest and reasonable conversation about why and how and when. So it doesn't need to be like super strict or anything. It can be pretty chill, but there should be something. Whether like we did job descriptions before you get a job, but we think job scorecards after to help us like keep on track. Like okay, like is this person doing the things that we expect them to do in this role? Yeah. That's been really good for us to like maintain like a high quality bar for like our contributors. Yeah. Yeah, and then one more thing about just us at Macro specifically, because we do have like a more stringent process to like determine who's a contributor and also who's a member of the DAO. We've got a lot of alumni now, senior engineers, that had to go through an application process, were admitted into our fellowship program, and then they've been now admitted into the DAO. And so we've also been lucky to know beforehand the quality of people that we have inside of what we're doing. And so that's been another metric that like we've been able to use is just like quality in equals quality out, and like making sure that the bar is high even before we hire somebody.
Yeah. What if the bar isn't high? What if you got like a B player that's entrenched?
Yeah.
Like what happens then?
Yeah.
Or C player, let's make it really spicy.
Yeah, oh, that's tough. I would question your processes that got the C player promoted that high.
What if you didn't have any process and your DAO was just immaculately conceived and this person just showed up and entrenched themselves?
Man.
Some nervous laughter in the audience. You guys have been through this
yeah,
here. Okay.
Y'all sleep though. Like some people are really good at like social climbing like that. Like they'll just talk and like, you know, the way they'll talk in like the public Discord channels like this and that, the other. And then they'll go into the DMs or like little group DMs or whatever. And they make totally different points and they curry favor like that with other folks. And then all of a sudden they've got a lot more power. I think it's important to try to like weed those people out. I also think that's why we do the things like job scorecards. Like ultimately we're gonna try to judge you by the results that you accomplish, and not by the way that like you can like spin a conversation or like the way that you can, you know, make people feel a certain type of way about something. It's more about results and actions than it is about talking.
Yeah, that works well if you can quantify results and, you know, measure things in a decentralized way. I just want to put a point on what the stakes are here, because I think that it's really important to note that A players want to work with other A players, and B players and C players in the bunch, that they're basically like the stick and the spokes of your train, and they get A players. Like when you're an A player and you're working with a B player or a C player, you're really... The C players will push out the A players if you don't push out the C players. So you really have to choose with your work culture. Are you going to be laissez-faire about this? Or are you going to just let this slide because decentralization? Or are you going to take action and really try to improve the culture? And I think teams are as productive as their least competent team member. So it's really tough, and this is politics. You're in decentralized politics when you're in these DAOs, and I think it's really I think we've all seen some shit because of that. But I think it's really important to, if you want to be competitive in a competitive marketplace with your DAO, then you've got to find a way to make a culture one that attracts A players.
Yeah, and so how have y'all like Gitcoin dealt with like B and C players? Because I totally agree. Like if you're an A player and all of a sudden you're grinding, you're working hard, you're putting out results, and then you see somebody else that's like getting the same like recognition, but their results aren't there, that's gonna push you out. So how have y'all dealt with it at Gitcoin?
Well, the quarterly governance process is where the DAO has set a purpose and essential intents for where it is going. The purpose is basically we want to build and fund, help communities fund their shared needs. The essential intents are the next 12 to 18 months of doing that. So launch Grants 2.0, launch Gitcoin Passport, and get those to adoption, because that's how we meet our shared needs. So that's the macro vision, and then there's a quarterly budgeting process where each work stream says how they're meeting those goals, and basically sets their target, asks for their budgets, and there's basically a quarterly budgeting process through which the work stream leads and the people with context will negotiate that. And that's what it looks like now, 18 months in. I'd say that like the first season was more just like, kind of like, well, actually the first 2 seasons we were just getting rubber stamps from the stewards because bull market, what the fuck, money is infinite, who gives a shit? But the really interesting time happened when ETH went from like 4,000 down to like 900, and the DAO was in a budgeting season. There was really some clause that came out there because people were fighting over budgets, and there were people that were literally laid off from the DAO as a result of that, and people got real about their essential intents. And I think that it's that DAO governance. That DAO governance is really where the stopper comes in. But ideally you want to have alignment such that it doesn't get to the stopper of like people pushing out, like threatening to defund other work streams and stuff like that. Like ideally there should be, so it goes back to power, trust, and ego, right? What you really want is, do you want to have a high trust environment where people can work with each other without having to play power politics, or egos can get involved, and that's where healthy culture comes from, I think. But you know, I kind of wish, I told Peter, I was like, I'm disaffiliated from Gitcoin DAO now. You should have someone who's in there right now talking about it, because I think that they've really worked out some stuff over the last 18 months.
So a couple questions, I'll make a point and then I'll kick it off again. So one, like how are the work stream leaders chosen right now? Two, like, you know, let's go like 3, 4, 5 years down the line. How do you see the balance between like a decentralized governance form and also making sure that you still have like high quality standards and things are getting done? I can tell you a little bit about kind of what our plan is at macro right now, but you know, this is subject to change as well. Right now we are a little bit more of like a corporate structure, but over time as we decentralize, we'd like our DAO members to elect council members, and those council members would then, you know, get budgets from the full DAO, and that's how basically then decisions would be made. And then I'll kick it off to you about the work stream questions.
Yeah, I have a fairly short working memory. What was the question again?
Yeah, so how are work stream members chosen right now? And then down the line, what do you think is like how do you think governance will play with like effectiveness, and like what do you think is a good structure for that?
Yeah, so I mean the work stream leads, I guess the DAO launched on May 2021. It was kind of like, you know, creating a town from scratch, and then, you know, like someone shows up in a red hat and you're like, you can be the fire chief, and then like someone shows up in a blue hat and you're like, you're the police chief now. That's how it started. But the work streams are all basically free to self-assemble. They're kind of like sovereign states almost, and you know, ideally they would all be electing a leader, in my opinion, but I think we've seen some entrenchment in who is a workstream lead and who's not. And I really hope that my disaffiliation from Gitcoin DAO sets off this like fractal of decentralization and impact, where people expect that you're always training up better people below you and you're passing the baton to them instead of just like making your workstream into your own little fiefdom. But I think that that's still a work in progress. And what was your second question?
Like longer term, what do you think is like a good balance between like governance and then also like decentralized governance and staying effective? Like what do you think might be a good decentralized governance structure?
How can you be decentralized and effective? So right now, Gitcoin has all this centralization debt from our days of being a centralized monolithic. I just built it wrong from the start. And I keep on saying we, but I've disaffiliated from Gitcoin DAO. Gitcoin DAO is now rewriting the entire product top to bottom to be a decentralized modular set of protocols. Gitcoin Passport is the Sybil resistance protocol. the grants registry is the grants protocol, and then we're going to have these like modular quadratic funding modules that you can install on top of the grants registry. So if you want to do Macy QF or pairwise QF or even retroactive public goods funding, you can do all that on Gitcoin grants instead of just like being married to one algorithm. Like that's what we're shooting for. And we have all this centralization debt because we're still using the old product. If you do the grants round, we're still unfortunately using the old product on it. And I really think that once the protocol exists and is out there and is modular, you don't need someone to run a server anymore. You don't need this spaghetti code base to be maintained anymore. And once you have the protocol out, then the protocol is the decentralized coordination for the product. And so for me, that's the next hump that we need to get over in order to have real decentralized coordination. And once you've set up the network effects of, like, network effects are basically like, when you join Facebook because all of your friends are on Facebook, and all of your friends are on Facebook because all of their friends are on Facebook. That's a network effect. And once the network effects of Gitcoin grants, the protocols start going, which is like more grants owners equals more grants funding equals more matching funders equals more grants funding. Like once you get that flywheel spinning, you don't need to have all this complicated abstract coordination anymore. You just basically are building around the edges to accelerate that flywheel. So my hope would be that if you're doing a protocol DAO, then the protocol handles most of the coordination and can do it totally trustlessly. But this may differ between like service DAOs or NFT DAOs or investment DAOs, depending on what kind of DAO you got.
Yeah, makes sense. I agree. Protocol DAOs, like that's like the purest form of it, right? Like that should be able to run autonomously on its own. That's kind of the ideal there. I think I was a little bit more curious about like service DAOs. Service DAOs and like investment DAOs, which is like what Macro is like looking to be as well. And like for us, like there is some amount of like human effort that's required to like develop services and keep it going. So like, what do you think about for those? Like, how would you structure coordination like in a decentralized manner for those types of DAOs?
Yeah, quadratic funding.
Got it.
You asked me a sincere question and I just like shilled you. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have any experience with that, so I'll abstain from that question.
Got it.
How much time do we have left? Do we have 10 more minutes? Anyone know? Cool. I would love to end with if anyone in the audience has like spicy questions or spicy stories they want to share about incompetence and bureaucracy. Probably don't name any names since we're recording, but I'm not seeing any volunteers. Oh, in the front row. Anyone?
Within the budgeted work streams that sort of compose into the larger DAO, should hiring and firing decisions within those groups be made as governance proposals of sort of the sub-DAO? Or should hiring and firing across all these working groups happen, I guess one question is, should it happen by governance at all? And then the other question is sort of, should it happen within those working groups or across the entire larger DAO?
So I'll just repeat the question. Should hiring and firing decisions happen via governance? Should they happen within a work stream? Should they happen within a team? Like, what's the sovereignty of those decisions? Could I sum up the question that way? Well, I guess I'll start by saying that DAOs are all different, and we're all kind of in this Cambrian explosion of figuring this out. So what's right for Gitcoin DAO probably isn't right for Macro DAO, probably isn't right for Meta Cartel. And so I think that you have to keep in mind the context of who you're answering that for and what are their values and their needs. I'm really, within Gitcoin DAO, the current way it works is that work streams are all sovereign to hire and fire as they need. But like sometimes the work streams will vibe check each other and be like, hey, this person isn't good, or hey, this person is great. And so you get that peer-to-peer feedback across work streams. I'm really interested in what Orca is doing with pods, where basically you have socialware inside teams of 3 to 6, and then you fund those teams of 3 to 6, and they can float around the organization and pick up projects and interoperate with each other. And you've got basically socialware, which is agreements based off of social consensus and, inside the pods, and then you've got trustware, which is basically decisions made by governance outside of the pods. I think that that's like 2 pizza teams is what we used to talk about in agile teams, and that's just the right size for people to really get to know each other and build intimate relationships and have productive working relationships, particularly if they have complementary skill sets like one developer, one designer, one project manager, one meme lord, if your organization does that. And I really like those small pod structures. I don't think hiring via governance is a good idea. That feels like a firing squad to me. I don't think that that's a good place to do hiring or firing decisions. don't know if you have a take, Keyshawn.
My take is pretty much the same. It really depends on the type of org you're in and what the needs are for that org at that time. As we've mentioned, there's always this kind of like, over time you decentralize more and more. And so in that, like, during that time, you might change how you decide to do hiring and firing. And so like, I'll say like right now we have hiring and firing. It's mostly done by like a work stream, or it's done by like the manager of that group in macro. But over time that might change. What we might also do at some point maybe is do like term limits for certain roles. And those term limits act as like a way for us to like make sure that that person is still a good fit for that role, and it's somebody that everybody else also wants in that role. I don't know exactly what we'll do when we get to that point, but those are just some different options that have floated around our heads.
All right, give me something spicy. Come on, it's MCON.
Right here.
So we're talking about firing and hiring. So where in DAOs we see mentorship, or like, how we level people up instead of just pushing people out?
I can go first.
Go ahead.
So like, I do think like setting clear expectations with people is one of the first things. And like making sure that they know like what are you actually expected to do. And then like as a mentor, it's really important to like, be honest with people. If you're not hitting your marks or something, then you want to make sure that you deliver that feedback as early as possible so that you give them a chance to rectify it. And a lot of that is just like human emotions and like making sure that you're able to manage people effectively. I don't think it needs to get that much more complicated than that, honestly, other than having a good working relationship with the people that you're with. And if you have expectations and then you're able to like set up some processes around it to help people achieve those goals that you've set for them, then that's gonna naturally get them better. And then if you provide them feedback when they're not hitting those marks and they respond to it in a positive manner, that's how they get better. If they don't respond to it in a positive manner, that's when you maybe have to start having a conversation with them about like, hey, this is not working out, and these are the reasons why. And it's been pretty well documented. It's been communicated in a clear manner effectively to them over the course of time, so nobody's like blindsided and nobody's like got their feelings hurt after you make that decision.
Yeah, plus one, I also think putting aside budget to do things like buy a book for whatever skill you want to take a course, come to conferences like MCON. There's so much you learn from just the conversations in the hallway here that develops you into a more effective DAO age human. And so yes, and provide budget for people to come do those things, I think too. All right, give me something spicier in the front row.
But how do you create consistency within the work streams for efficiency? Because what I've been seeing is that because we're in this decentralized nature, every project, every work stream has their own way of working, which isn't necessarily aligned with the DAO or necessarily in the benefit of the DAO. And so what we're seeing is a lot of misalignment in terms of like what projects we should focus on, but every project that you participate in is like going into a new job. So like what are some strategies for creating consistency DAO-wide within like the project streams where people aren't
Yeah.
making incentives?
So the question was, how do we create more consistency DAO-wide in how work is done?
How do you create consistency within the work streams work
With
DAO-wide rather
Yeah.
than on a project-by-project basis?
Yeah, you want to take a swing at that, or should I? Or
Sure, I can. You can go for it.
okay. Yeah, I don't think that such consistency can be mandated from the top down. The approach Gitcoin DAO took was that there were 6 work streams that were funded in May of 2021, plus or minus 1 or 2 as things have evolved over time. And basically, there's this meeting that is developed called Cross-Stream DAO Ops, which is the intro workstream governance and operational workstream. It sounds so boring when I say it out loud, but it's actually a lot of fun.
That was a lot of words.
And yeah, and it's just cross-pollination between DAOs of best practices. And so what you're looking to do is create bottoms-up cross-pollination of best practices, not mandate from the top down that things need to be done a certain way. And so we've had a couple consent-driven proposals that come up where it's like, we're gonna do our accounting this way and we're all gonna adhere to these standards. And there was a salary transparency and consistency basically proposal that they were working through within that governance structure. So I think the first key TLDR is to get your workstream leads all cross-pollinating and sharing information with each other. Hopefully they're doing that because they row in the same direction, and then they can create consistency where it helps them. But I don't think you can mandate it from the top down, or at least I haven't seen it that be successful.
Yeah, no, I mostly, I agree with that. I think ultimately it kind of has to start with like a shared vision that like,
It's so important.
yeah, that like coalesces into like a shared culture, and then it's about like how do you build this culture where like everybody is performing and they're working on the right things. We all want everybody swimming in the or like rowing the boat in the same direction, right? And so again, for us, like sometimes that does mean like you have on-sites and you stop being decentralized for like a week or 2 weeks where you bring everybody together, and that's really the best way to make these human connections that allow you to then work with each other and also get mad at each other a little bit without everything blowing up.
Yeah. Disagreeing respectfully is so important when you
Yeah.
disagree, because if you go personal, if you go nuclear, then that relationship is toast.
Yeah. There's a, yeah.
Oh, you got a spicy story for us?
It's not with our DAO, but you know, there was
Asking for a friend, Dow.
yeah. So there was like, I mean, it's out there, but like there was like a DeFi project recently where like one of the core contributors, I think it was even a co-founder, just went a little haywire, you know, had some bad debts or whatever, and then stole a bunch of money. That's like, you know, a nuclear option right there. So that's stuff you want to avoid, obviously, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, incompetence in bureaucracy is what we came to talk about, but outright fraud, I'm sure will happen in a couple of these cases, and that's why, this is another reason why decentralization matters, is that founder should not have the keys to the treasury themselves.
Yeah.
I think we're about out of time. We can do one more spicy take if, all right, in the back, what's your spicy take? You with the phone. Network effects, yeah.
No, I hear that you mentioned the network effect, and I bet that it's related with the cold start problem book from Andrew too. And my question is, if so, what KPIs or information you gathered so far, learning from our community, and how you are dealing with atomic networks and so on. How are you testing, or if you are using network effects KPIs?
Yeah, so the question is, what are the KPIs for network effects?
Yeah.
Cool. So network effects are just the idea that a network gets more valuable the more people use it. So like the canonical example is the fax machine. One fax machine is useless. Keyshawn, if you have a fax machine, then there's one person I can send faxes to. If everyone in this room has a fax machine, then there's let's call it 100 people. And so the value grows exponentially depending on the number of fax machines that are out there, because the number of communication patterns that can be created in the network grows exponentially. And this applies to social networks where you only want to go if your friends are there. And it applies to grants funding platforms, because why am I going to post a grant to a funding platform where there are no funders? And why am I going to be a funder on a platform where there is no grants? And so I think that you have to know what the drivers of your network effects are in your network if you're building a double-sided network. And for us, it's grants created and number of people who are funding those grants, but it's just really dependent on the project that you're working on. Not related to incompetence and bureaucracy and DAOs, but a good question nonetheless. Thank you. You in the front row, what's up?
What was your worst experience with a DAO-to-DAO collaboration that was caused by technology, not the people?
What was the worst DAO-to-DAO experience that was caused by technology, not the people? Do you got one?
No, I don't have a great answer here. That's the truth.
Most of my problems are people problems these days.
Yeah.
Which is hard because I have a computer science degree. I'm like not equipped for it. But I mean, the biggest problem that I'm dealing with right now is the infinite game of Sybil attackers trying to get money out of the matching pool by falsifying identities, and that's kind of a social problem. But that's just like an adversarial zero-sum game. Here's something fun is like Gitcoin was looking for its product market fit for like 2 years, and we discovered quadratic funding, and we're like, awesome, quadratic funding enables exponential growth, but quadratic funding depends on Sybil attacks, and there's no known problem to solve Sybil attacks. So we're like a castle in the fucking sky, like on top of the Sybil problem. And so, yeah, Gitcoin Passport and Sybil resistance has been the biggest social problem that I'm aware of and I'm focused on right now. But a lot of these DAO to DAO relationships and like formal partnerships usually have people putting their best foot forward because they know they're representing their DAOs. So I haven't seen a lot of social malignancy in those type of relationships.
Yeah, in those situations, I think the thing that I've seen that's been toughest is like honestly the regulatory environment. Like sometimes it's just like who can get paid by what means and how and where, and trying to figure out those issues which don't have any answers. Lawyers won't even give you an answer. They don't know.
Don't get me started on lawyers. Yeah, $600 to find out there is no answer. $600 an hour. All right, well, our time is up. Thank you so much for spending time with me. See you later.
Thank you.
Give it up for these guys. Thank you so much.
You can take it to the.
Thank you.
Well, hello everyone.
Fell apart.
My name is Callum Gladstone. I'm a founder of FireEyes DAO, which is an organization that
I couldn't really hear you that well.
helps a bunch of projects in the space through their journey through decentralization and towards tokenization. So that might be token design, distribution, governance, communication, and a whole bunch of other stuff. And I'm joined today by MCON2, who is a core contributor at Nouns DAO. And I'll let him give a little intro of his own.
Cool. Thanks, Tom. Can everyone hear me? Is this working? I like it. All right, perfect. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. And to the host, thanks for hosting me and having me here. So yeah, I'm a core contributor at Nouns DAO. What that practically means in my case is I perform some of the organizational functions, onboarding new members, organizing some of the weekly calls, and I also run a grants program, which used to be called Small Grants, though because of the evolving nature of the group, we changed it to Nouns Strategic Funding Workshop, which is an acronym, NSFW, in which we kind of are like the DAO's hot wallet / one of the two small grants pods that gives out small funding. I can go into all the different ways of that Nouns funds its contributors, but basically I'm the lead for a small grants program. Yeah, and I guess I'll go into the way that I got into this. Is that it?
Yeah. I think we can run through like how you got involved in Nouns DAO, and then what is a noun, what is the Nouns DAO, and then what does it mean to be nounish?
Okay. Yeah, I got involved in Nouns. I've been involved professionally in crypto for the last 5 years in a variety of roles, from the institutional side to working on an interoperability protocol to running a fund. And in 2021, I had seen what was going on with DAOs, what was going on with NFTs, kind of in the background. Like, it just wasn't my main focus. I was mostly like looking at DeFi and interoperability back then. But it all kind of came together for me last summer. There was the mint of a project called Crypto Dick Butts, which some people may be familiar. But it basically kind of opened my eyes to this idea of memes being art, and the ability that the killer use case of NFTs was to allow people to I think invest in memes, own memes, which are inherently digitally native, so that the medium by which you own them shouldn't be physical, right? It should be digital. And then shortly after that, I heard a podcast with one of the founders of Nouns, 4156, basically describing his vision, suggesting that if CryptoPunks were the Citizen Kane of NFTs, that we still hadn't seen a further evolution like a Jurassic Park or the Godfather. And what I think is so interesting about Nouns is the way that Nouns works is once every day, and this happens all on chain, and a Nouns NFT is auctioned off. It selects generatively from a set of 256 heads, a bunch of different accessories, and this is just running code. This will continue running in perpetuity. And every day it runs an auction, and the proceeds of that auction are not given to the creators or a founder or anything. They're deposited into a communal treasury. And then everyone who owns one noun has one vote over what to do with the proceeds of that treasury. So in that sense, it combines the aspects of NFTs and a PFP project with what I think is a very pure form of a DAO. It's all done via smart contracts, all done permissionlessly, and also has this pretty sizable treasury to boot. So I thought it was in a space that I've found to be forks of forks of forks of forks, a really novel and interesting experiment, and something that hadn't been tried before, and something that still we don't really see many close comps to in the space.
No, it's very interesting. I think to double click on something that you said, the way that Nouns was founded is so different to a lot of other PFP or NFT collections or projects, because there isn't this founder effect where these people who I guess deployed the smart contracts or deployed the collection are just constantly accruing ETH on secondaries, on primary sales, whereas Nouns, all of that value is going into the treasury that's collectively owned. So yeah, I guess how do you see that treasury and that differentiation from normal NFT projects, positioning Nouns as I think somewhat of a top level collection or community?
Yeah, I think the incentive structure, it just creates a long-term perspective. The founders, instead of getting paid in royalties or transaction fees, are just given 1 out of every 10 of the Nouns. So they own 10% of the project. They have a 10% vote over what to do with the treasury. And so, ultimately, the goal of this treasury is to, proliferate Nouns as a meme, as a brand, to just strengthen the brand by using the money that we have to strengthen it. The Nouns art itself is licensed under Creative Commons 0, which basically means anyone can use it for any reason, for any commercial purpose, whatever, which we think is the best way if you were going to proliferate a viral internet meme, right? If you wanted to open a store selling Mickey Mouse t-shirts, Disney would sue you. But if you wanted to open a store selling Nouns t-shirts, not only would we not sue you, not only couldn't we sue you, I'd probably give you a grant to do it. And we think that is the way to basically proliferate this and turn Nouns into cultural icons, right? Make them culturally ubiquitous, make everyone know what they are, since ostensibly that should keep more and larger participants coming in to join the DAO, and then increase the value of the provenance of the NFTs that we own. Earlier, every noun, there's no more rare nouns than others. The only thing that really sets them apart in terms of, I guess, what you could call rarity is their provenance, how early they were minted. So we think that if successful, if everyone in the world knows what nouns are, if they're as popular as the Pope or Coca-Cola, that the nouns themselves should be worth a lot. But there isn't there's no pumponomics in the short term of like you see in many projects, just coins go up, they go down, they fade into irrelevance. I think Nouns is building akin to in a decentralized way, similar to something like an Ethereum or many other DAOs, where it's long-term thinking, open and permissionless, which means it's necessarily slower, but I think designs for a stronger foundation over time.
Nice. And I guess to follow on from that, the Nouns governance model is very, I would say straightforward and very simple, but it's very effective. And can you give us some more context on how that governance works at, I guess, the top level, and then how it's evolved down to these smaller groups and smaller organizations within the Nouns DAO that are pushing forward on certain initiatives?
Yeah, sure. So at the simplest level, one noun is one vote. So one noun, or in this case two, but you can a proposal is published to the Nouns DAO. on chain, everyone votes on chain, and in that proposal text, there's like transactions embedded. So it's all done permissionlessly via smart contract. But as the DAO's gotten bigger, we've realized that not necessarily everything needs to be a decision by committee, right? Like we kind of reserve on-chain votes for some of the bigger proposals, for larger asks or things that are just more strategically important to the organization. But we've started to delegate responsibility to different pods of experts who are able to make quick decisions and kind of have their lane of what they do. Myself being one example, I run the NSFW grants program, but we also have a technical grants program. We have a Japanese version of what I do, a Japanese small grants program. We have an esports pod. So we've started to see, just larger funding asks go to pods of experts. And then separately in the on-chain governance itself and in the full on-chain votes, we've started to see the emergence of large voting blocks, like political parties, whether it's the Nounders, who, like I was mentioning earlier, own 10% of the project, a block of guys who have come in and just been buying a lot of nouns and I think own 6% of the project, or people like me who have interest of their own in owning nouns, but are being delegated a number of votes from people who, for whatever reason, are not able to, they've gone inactive, they're not able to pay full attention to governance just because as we've scaled up, it's just so much is happening, and I'm a perfect example. Keeping up with this stuff in the DAO all day has become a full-time job. So I think that we're going to start to see more and more political parties, large voting blocks emerge as people who own these assets delegate to people who they think will act in their interest, in the interest of the DAO, in their financial interest of the asset they own.
Yeah, and I think that's it's a product of the mechanism, right? Like if you imagine at the beginning, 10 days in, there are only 10 nouns, it's pretty easy to coordinate 10 people, right? But now we're at 450 something.
Yeah.
That's a much larger group and like a much more complex coordination experiment. And I think that's just going to continue as more and more and more nouns are minted, which is something that's really different, I think, from the 10K PFP project, model.
Oh yeah, I mean, in the early days, like you're saying, we all knew each other. It was just 15 guys in a Discord, and now just because one noun equals one vote, you kind of have people come and go in terms of how active they are. But if someone were to join the DAO tomorrow with one vote, and wants to put a proposal through or wants his voice heard, he is on the same footing as all of us. There is social capital that accrues to people. Some people, their opinions are taken more seriously by the DAO than others. But if someone wanted to force a vote and get everyone's attention on a certain issue, one noun is one vote. So that's something we've had to deal with.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. So to zoom in on NSFW and these other smaller kind of expert tactical squads that are pushing forward on different initiatives, what's the most interesting proposal that you've seen come to one of these smaller groups that has had a massive impact on the Nouns DAO more broadly?
Sure. One of the things that I've found my role and the role of NSFW being in Nouns is almost like a de-risking function for some of the larger, more ambitious proposals, right? You'll have someone come to the DAO and they'll be completely pseudo, they'll have no identity prior to them spinning one up. And they go, I want all this money to do this big, really cool sounding thing. And we've found it's been a lot easier to, de-risk them somehow. And I've kind of taken on the role of that, of going to people being like, look, I hear what you want to do. You sound genuine. Can I give you 2 ETH and you do something for a month? And then we can go to the DAO and be like, look, this is real. This person can deliver, and let's vote on it. And I think one of the coolest ones that we've seen, and there's a number of these examples, but one of the coolest ones that we saw was the Nouns vision. And there's someone here who has the glasses. Hi, if you're here. But basically, we had a guy, Salvino Armati, comes to the DAO. Salvino Armati is a pseudonym. Apparently, it's the person who invented glasses 3 centuries ago. But he's using that name, and he goes, I want to create luxury glasses. We did exactly what I described. Give him 2 ETH. He spends a month spinning some stuff up. Everyone kind of gets confident. We realize the need for having these physical glasses in the real world. So this dude gets funded. Spends a few months spinning this up. You can go buy them right now, nouns.vision, I think. And it's you get the NFT and you burn it and he sends it to you. But that all came from what was doing a trial to sponsoring a larger thing on chain. And as part of that, the guy Salvino as part of his compensation, was granted a noun in addition to the ETH that he got. So he's now a member of the DAO. So I like this flywheel. If people come, we de-risk them. They work on a bigger, ambitious they work on something small that builds up to something larger and increases their involvement in the community, whether just as someone who does not own a noun and is getting compensated for work, or even to a path to owning a noun and participating in governance over the treasury.
Yeah, it's super interesting because, you know, obviously the 50 to 80 ETH that it costs to buy a noun from the smart contract is unattainable for a lot of people, but it's really cool to see that there are still pathways into the nouns community that don't involve, you know, aping 50 ETH into a noun. So let's talk about these kind of like forks or derivatives of nouns, so like the lil nouns and public nouns. Can you talk a bit about those and how those communities have become part of the nouns community and how the interplay between OG nouns and lil nouns works?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, when I first started on the project, one of the things that we were doing from the grants program was funding derivatives. Everyone just kind of doing their little play on nouns and minting an NFT. And I thought it's valuable for these things to exist because it makes the originals more valuable, right? In the same way that if you just saw like Mona Lisa derivatives, right? It makes the original more valuable. So we should have these exist. But what I came to realize is creating communities around derivatives, or we call them extensions now, is a way to scale the DAO because, like you're saying, I think there's a limited pool of people who like are, you know, into crypto, can pay 80 ETH for a noun, right? Eventually, we're going to run out of that, but I do think it can scale through having communities built around acquiring multiple nouns. So we've seen a number of attempts, the simplest being someone just bought a noun, put it on fractional, and sold portions of it. And people had like ERC20s that represented a partial ownership of a noun, but really that didn't make them feel like they were a part of anything. And there wasn't a ton of liquidity, so that idea kind of died off. And one of the more interesting ideas we've seen recently was little nouns, which is something that we funded from small grants. I think back in January we covered their mint fees, but basically they took the nouns art, they created they made it a little bit smaller, they made the glasses bigger, so it kind of looks like these like cute little versions of the nouns. Instead of one a day, they do auctions every 15 minutes. And it was really interesting to see. I was wondering, you know, would this be successful? Would this launch be successful? And they've managed to sustain a lot of attention, have a lot of you know, builders join that community. And critically, what I think led to their success was, as part of their design choices, we didn't tell them to do this. They gave 10% ownership in the same way 10% ownership of nouns accrues to the nounders. 10% ownership of little nouns is sent directly to the Nouns DAO treasury. So nouns owns 10% of little nouns, all permissionlessly. But I think that makes us incentivized to see them succeed. So we saw a lot of nouns interacting with little nouns, not out of, there's a million derivative projects, but people seem to focus on that one, and I think it was because, A, the art was really good, and little nouns, I think, like, it's just a cool meme, but also B, because we have ostensibly have a financial interest in it. And so now there's a product being developed by the guys at Zora called Nouns Builder, which will make it very easy for less technical people like me, to be able to spin up DAOs of their own using the distribution mechanisms, you know, X nouns distributed over Y amount of time. And then I think the incentive foreplay of like giving a percentage ownership or giving a revenue share of the ETH from auctions or creating some kind of smart contract that assures that the ETH that goes to the sub-DAOs is used to buy nouns and return ETH to the nouns treasury. This is an entirely new design space. And I think that the sub-DAOs like that are going to be critical to scaling the DAO. Like I said, you need to get more smaller participants in. But if we can figure out the right incentive structures, and we've basically just scratched the surface of it, that I think is one of the most important things and what I'm most excited about over the next 6 months.
Yeah, it's super interesting. So like, nouns I think has become almost like a meme factory, right? Like the creation of this mechanism to, you know, have this perpetual minting of community, right? Of like more community members. So like, how do you see that like meme factory or culture factory being used, I guess, in ways outside of Nouns DAO, or like in other ways both within crypto, outside of crypto? Like, how do you see the mechanism at large, like, influencing culture?
Yeah, it's really interesting because like we've asked ourselves as a DAO, like, what is nounish? And you asked me that earlier. and it's been challenging just because like we've been like, what is our mission statement, right? And there inherently isn't one as a decentralized organization. Like I think the only really broad goal that you could say the DAO is there to do is to proliferate the nouns meme. And there's been a big emphasis on public goods, philanthropy, charity, doing things to make the world a better place, which is like a fantastic use case. You can see why it's getting so popular, because I think especially in crypto, you know, which has been popularized for, you know, Lambos and stuff like that, it is very unique. And so I think that there's kind of two cultures. There's one within the DAO, which I think is, you know, call it similar to this room of like crypto native, Ethereum native, likes DAOs, likes NFTs, like Creative Commons Zero. But as we like export the Nouns brand into the real world, I think, and this is just my opinion as one member of the DAO, that it would take a different approach of, you don't have, if you're gonna see nouns and be exposed to them, you don't have to be beat over the head with, if you're gonna like this, you need to like Ethereum, you need to like crypto, you need to like NFTs. I think that, and Creative Commons Zero, I think Creative Commons Zero and NFTs, all the things are just tools that we can use to proliferate this meme wider. And if one of those emergent value sets, emergent memes, is the emphasis on public goods, right? Like we sponsored a few, these guys cleaned up a beach in Singapore, or these people cleaned up a village in Africa, and we've done their village in Africa, and we've done a number of contests that way. I think that that's what we export, is the meme of public goods and doing good, but without necessarily having to attach the inner DAO values of Ethereum and DAOs and Creative Commons Zero and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's almost like, it's a really interesting way to bring, you know, the concept of a DAO in like an approachable way to normal people, right? Like, you know, you see these cool little noun PFPs, you're like, oh, what's that? It's this, you know, decentralized coordination mechanism. You can come to it, and with that you say, you know, if you want to clean up a beach in Singapore, if you want to, you know, educate people about anything, if you want to just do something good for the world, I think you can come to Nouns DAO. If you put enough, you know, effort and enough kind of value into a proposal, then I'm sure it would, you know, go through.
Yeah, and though public goods and charity has been an emergent value set, like that is not exclusively what we are or what we fund, right? And one of the things that I try to do through my work at NSFW is make people understand, right? Like, if you come to the DAO and you want to volunteer your time and energy and contribute in whatever way, like everyone is good at what they're good at, they have the network that they have, like all in service of like proliferating a viral internet meme. So there's really like the design space of how you can do this is infinite, right? That they'll be compensated, right? So we've had people come to us and just be like, oh, I want to do this, I want to draw a picture of that. What we try to do is like, look, if you demonstrate genuine interest and you know, aren't just coming for like a cash grab, which obviously certainly happens, but if you demonstrate genuine interest in the project, like it is no problem for us to send you, you know, called in thousands of dollars, right? To pursue a creative project of your choosing, right? It's not like we have a job board of like, here's things that we need to do. I mean, we have that, but we were very open to people being like, here's what I want to do, and I need like 2 ETH to do it, and we'll be like, done, right? And that's the message that we are really trying to get out there. You know, outside of strictly public goods, really anything to do to proliferate the meme. I mean, announced value set, not in like a, you know, not to do things in like a cynical or evil way, right? But like everything kind of feeding into this like virtuous flywheel.
Yeah, so the Nouns DAO has like a pretty significant treasury, and something we were talking about at the Metacartel Town Hall yesterday regarding the Metacartel treasury is we just want to spend it on cool shit, and then we can figure out how to replenish it. So with the Nouns DAO mechanism of, you know, the nouns selling every day and constantly topping up that treasury, is the goal to, you know, just put that value out there, put it into the community, and make cool shit happen? Or like, I guess, what are like your perspective on like the overarching goals of having that much money within this like coordination collective, and like what you can do with that?
Yeah, I mean, so there is no like mission statement of like what the treasury is for outside of being used to just promote the brand and I've been saying a million times, proliferate the meme. There are many different schools of thought. Some people are much more liberal in how they would want to spend it and at the scale at which they would want to spend it. And some people view it completely the opposite way and want to conserve the ETH as much as possible simply because they think we'll keep getting more ETH into the treasury, and they think that ETH will, you know, increase in value. So the ETH that we have today will become considerably more value in the coming years. Where I sit on it is I think that there will sometimes be very big, interesting proposals that come to us. And big in our context today is something that wants like $500,000 or $1 million. Like that would be a very serious proposal that we received. And I'm in favor of those in the right way, but largely I think to accomplish our goals, and this kind of feeds into the work that I do, that I've seen big proposals certainly do work and do succeed and do help the project. But I think you can do so much more leveraging the internet and leveraging the global scale of the internet and social media. And I've found that 1 ETH into the right hands will go a lot further than 300 ETH into someone's hands. So whether it's the stuff that I do at NSFW, or I don't think we've even mentioned Prop House, which is another small grants program that the DAO runs. We're not just strictly small grants, but it's another way to get ETH to builders. The way Prop House works, I should mention, is basically different rounds are done. And as part of these rounds, the DAO commits to giving out, call it 5 prizes of 2 ETH, but those numbers can change. And people come to the DAO and they say, hey, here's my idea, here's what I want to get funded for 2 ETH. And then collectively, all the DAO, everyone in the DAO can vote on which ones they think are most should be rewarded with that 2 ETH. And so that's another mechanism by which that we're able to get small grants out into the community. But so I think one of the things that's critical and important to the DAO is not just being able to do these big, bold, ambitious proposals, but scaling the way through multiple pods like mine, pods like Prop House, that we're able to just get 1 to 2 ETH in as many talented, well-meaning, competent builders' hands as we can.
Yeah, and that's something that's like so new and so like different. You know, the ability to get funding for a cool idea. You know, what's like the timeline on getting funding from NSFW or Prop House?
Like, if someone hits me up on Discord and the idea sounds good, I'll send it within 15 minutes.
Yeah, you know, like thinking about, you know, traditional grants funding mechanisms, you know, like universities, corporate grants funding mechanisms, like it's going to take you a week, a month, a year to get, you know, even a few $1,000s from one of those organizations. But the ability to do that in 15 minutes is like absolutely insane.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about how it's going to evolve, right? Because right now there's 430 nouns, there's 200 people who own them, and there's, you know, 20 to 30 of us who are really active in governance. And so the way that we operate, or the way I operate my grants program, is just like, kind of we just do what we feel like. We think, you know, it works right now, but I do wonder that as the DAO grows, and as, you know, the needs for us to think about things, I was gonna use the word professionally, but it's not the right word, but like, you know, in a more like scaled up way. That
large organization problems.
Correct, right? Like, I think what DAOs enable are the ability to it can scale the scale of human coordination, right? Anyone in the world can join one of these things and participate and be compensated on the merits of their contribution. But I have seen a strain of thinking in people in nouns, you know, who think that, oh, well, here's how the real world does things. And this is kind of like a rebellion against the real world. So we should strive to do things differently, which I think isn't wrong on its face, but like inherently at the end of the day, whether it's using blockchain technology or not, like we are all humans trying to make decisions. So there are certainly lessons that we've seen like in the past, and we've seen it happen with Bitcoin and Ethereum and with DeFi, where you're like, oh, I can see we're kind of just as a community like speed running this and making the same mistakes, fucking up in the same way, learning the same lessons, but at ultra fast speed. And I think we're seeing a ton of that happen in DAOs as a whole, and then just from my microcosm, the way I view the world through nouns, it is certainly more structured and professional and large than it was when it was 15 guys and now it's, you know, 200, right? And I can only imagine if I was having this conversation with you right here a year later, how different it would be, because it's changed so much in the last 6 months alone.
Yeah, and I think that's like, it's almost a product of the internet and like this instant communication, you know, technology that we have, that we can speed run things. You know, if you think about the evolution of corporate governance, a lot of that evolution came, you know, when I had to send you a letter if I wanted to communicate with you. So you kind of like forced to think about things more and forced to like, you know, meditate on the processes that are being designed. Whereas now with the internet, you can just, you know, spin up a Telegram group, spin up a DAO, spin up whatever, and make decisions and just make impact. I think, you know, there are positives and negatives to that, but I think we're overall we're going in the right direction. I think we're officially over time. I don't know where Yale is, but if there are any questions, spicy questions from the audience, we'd love to hear them.
Could you characterize the voting blocks in the DAO?
Sure. So I guess there's the big three. The first one is the Nounders, who have 10% of the vote, and then some that they all personally own, so it's in excess of 10%. I don't know if I'd be able to characterize their strict stances, because the Nounders are made up of originally 10, but now I think 8 people, and I think they vote collectively within themselves as to what to do with all of their votes. The second is a voting block that has basically accrued to a few people who've I think have bought, around 32 nouns. I think they're more in favor of experimentation and innovation, strictly as using the treasury as a means to invest in different things, right? There was one vote that we saw that was somewhat contentious, where the Nounders faced off against this alternative voting block, was over the investment into an NFT protocol. I believe I would characterize the Nounders, and again, I'm not a Nounder, but I would characterize them as thinking that we would want to use this DAO for public goods, for things related to the Noun's mission, and not just as a way to invest in things and make money. And this other group, I think, thought that why not invest in things and make money because it can grow the treasury. And then the third voting group, which has emerged, is me. As I've accrued a number of delegates, and I think I've made my stances here clear. I just like the idea of encouraging experimentation and not doing things that could cause a schism or divide the group. Really just like, I'm here to try to just be like the glue of the organization and try to hold things together. So there's a few opinions that I have strongly about where we should go in the direction of the protocol, but largely I just try to grease the wheels, so to speak.
Over here.
How important do you think retroactive funding can be to the DAO ecosystem?
I think it's really important. I run NSFW. One of the things that we do is retro funding. Like if someone does something cool, even without the expectation of reward, like we're happy to give them a reward based on the merits of their contributions. There are some people in the DAO, and this is where I do differ, who think that the bulk of all compensation should come from retro rewards. Like people should do things for, I might be exaggerating their viewpoint, but they largely think that if people are paid a certain market rate to do something, that there should be gigantic amounts of retro rewards that can come their way as a way of compensation. I personally, as a guy who's a core contributor to the protocol who gets compensated to work for the protocol, think that we should just be very upfront and clear and generously compensate people based on like milestones as opposed to retroactively. Like I think retroactively bonuses are like a nice kiss, call it, but I don't think that we should be reliant on compensating contributors using them. In the same way that the reason I work for a DAO is like I don't want to work for a bank anymore where some guy at the end of the year decides how much I get paid, right? I'd rather just be like, look, here's what I'm doing, here's what I want to get paid. Does the DAO think I should, or does the DAO think that I should not?
Peter's waving at me, so I think it's lunchtime. Yeah, one more question.
Oh, my background? So I started my career in 2008. I worked in emerging markets, and I was always a computer nerd, and I sold virtual items in Warcraft and Diablo and Team Fortress, and I found Bitcoin that way in 2014, went full-time on the institutional side. I went to a bank where I was like the head of business development in 2017. In 2019, I went to a really large asset manager where I helped create their digital or crypto asset management business, where we mostly focused on institutional adoption of Bitcoin and Ethereum. In 2021, I became really involved in DeFi and interoperability. I went and I worked for a protocol that was building out the ecosystem for a decentralized infrastructure protocol. And then just through my overall involvement in network and crypto, came across, like I mentioned, Dick Butts and then Nouns last summer. So I've kind of came at it from a TradFi background, but then just through experimenting and looking around in crypto, have kind of just latched on to anything that I find interesting at the time. Oh yeah, like the 10 founders, the 10 nounders are all either artists or engineers, and I am neither, right? Yeah. Yeah. I think we got to cut it off, but I can find you after.
Yeah, thank you, Nouns22.
Thank you.
And Callum for Far Eyes. So we have a special performance, actually. Before we head into the break, I present the Meta Musicians. I don't know if they have a band name, but...
Yeah, thank you. You guys.
Hey, dude, great to meet you.
This is on. Okay.
I'm still mic though.
Glad you made it.
Yeah, so my name is Mia. This is Pat. We are both members of the Ethereum community, very involved. We're also both musicians. And, you know, people always say to write about what you know. So we wrote a little song to kind of capture some of the things that are happening in the ecosystem now. Wanted to make a special song for MCON. So Pat is actually going to send the lyrics of this song to the MCON group. So everyone can open it and you can sing along. This is only going to be about 5 minutes. So please join us. Basically, the structure of the song, it's going to be verse, chorus, verse, chorus. So we're going to keep on going back to the chorus, so please join in. And yeah, thanks for being here, everyone.
Bring your instruments next year.
Yeah, bring your instruments.
Wonderful. Well, Matthew, do you want to? AV, can we have some help with the mics, please? We want to make sure that we don't miss any alpha here. Yeah, can we grab a handheld? Thank you for your patience, friends.
Yo, yo. Oh, there we go. All right, okay.
We are in business. So Matthew,
Yeah.
with your crispy new mic, would
Yo.
you like to welcome our friends here into the world of Song Camp and share a little bit about how we got to now?
Sure, yeah. So we're meant to talk a bit about Web3 and music, and that's been my interest. I'm a musician, singer, songwriter foremost. Fell down the rabbit hole late 2020, early 2021. Music and NFTs were just starting to bubble, not so much was going on yet. So I spun up the Songcamp Discord in March of 2021 as a place for musicians to just crash into each other and run experiments at the edges of music and Web3. And so now we're 15 months into that, and we call ourselves a Web3 laboratory experimenting at the edges of music and the new internet. And our experiments that we run are called camps. We've run 3 flagship camps in that time, and our camps take the shape of a songwriting camp. If those of you are familiar with what a songwriting camp looks like, a bunch of musicians usually converge in meet space and create music over a period of time, but then it usually just ends. It dissolves and falls away, and a lot of that music gets stuck in this thing we call the music industry. The idea with our camps was not to end when the music is done being created, but to actually extend the camp to the release of that music, to the visual creation for that music, to the lore creation of that music, and now using interesting distribution mechanics within Web3 land to make that all happen in a cohesive, kind of collectively coordinated way. And we've just been playing at the edges of that through every camp. So the actual NFT sort of distribution that we're doing for each camp gets more and more interesting, trying to play with the new innovative tools we have at our disposal. And yeah, that's what we've been doing for 15 months. We can get into the weeds of that a bit.
Spectacular, and we shall.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Matthew.
And what about you, Evan? Can you please, you're wearing a hat that says disco. I would love to know more about disco.
Oh my gosh. Well, welcome to the dance floor, everybody. So disco is your identity for the metaverse. And at Disco, our definition of the metaverse is a little different. We do not believe it is hanging out inside of someone else's website with an iPad strapped to your face. Rather, we think that the metaverse is your ability to show up in any digital or physical environment and receive a personalized experience as a result of the parts of yourself that you choose to share. We believe that you, like a disco ball, are the multifaceted center of the party just as you are, and you should reflect your data and your identity to the world however you choose. So at Disco, we are the purveyors of fine data backpacks. Your wallet is for all of your public financial data, all of the information that's appropriate for global public availability in perpetuity, and your data backpack is for all of the rest of the information that you need to enable all of your metaverse adventures from Web 2 to Web 3 across chains. So what we allow you to do is easily take custody of signed, independently verifiable, off-chain data written about you with the same keys that you use to manage your identity on-chain. This is everything from your shoe size to your KYC credentials, your credit score to your proof of residency, proof of membership in good standing in DAOs, proof of non-financial work that you contribute to your crew that is not going to be documented in the form of tokens on-chain. From writing newsletters to hosting dope conferences, thank you, Peter, for having us, Metacartel, as well as things like proofs of your reputation, proof of chill, that you are a good homie, that you're a trustworthy person. And so being able to express oneself in Web3 beyond your financial assets is what will allow us to be fully multifaceted, collaborative human beings coordinating around more than money, being more than group chats with bank accounts, which is what most of our DAOs are today. And I say this as a canonical signer and enthusiast and member of a number of DAOs. So at Disco, what we think a lot about is, how do we transpose, import, enable the facets that make you you beyond the money that you have. I think that the money that you have is probably the least interesting thing about you, right? The places you hang out, the people who trust you, the communities where you're accountable, the music that you like, the shows that you vibe at. These are much more interesting things that I would much rather talk to you about at a party than how many tokens of something that you own. It's also much easier to coordinate vibes around a shared experience and a shared sense of identity than it is a shared currency. Right? I don't have all that much in common with other people who hold US dollars, but come hang out with me if you like to go to Flume shows. So, one thing that, that we talk about a lot, Matthew and I have had an opportunity to chat about is ambient value. So we run through the world, connecting with one another, experiencing delight, creating things, and in those experiences, we throw off a lot of data. We create a lot of data exhaust, right? The proofs of our interactions are only captured in those spaces that are, ready to document them. So interactions on chain, interactions in centralized, centralized tools like Google Drive or Discord. But what about all of the ways that we interact that have not yet, had containers created for them? That are not standard to the way that we document our interactions already. So would love to start thinking about some of these new concepts that create and capture value in different ways when we are a little bit more decentralized in that act of co-creation. So Matthew, would you share with our friends a little bit more about what is a headless band? And what does it mean to co-create in a sort of less formal, more decentralized manner?
Yeah, so we started, I feel like in the last camp, which was our third camp that we ran called Chaos earlier this year, culminating in the summer, it was our first time calling what we were doing a headless band. A headless band of 77 individuals were part of Chaos, and we called all those 77 people artists, and that ran the span of not just the musicians, but everyone involved in the project, including the visual artists, the devs, the operators. We had a podcast within the band being created during our project. All these people were all a part of the band. We all were moving as this network called Chaos. So instead of putting this individual in the front and center of this project, or creating some sort of lead master of what we're creating all for, we were moving as this network of one. And I think now when we look back, as it is so much easier when we look backwards than forwards to see how the arc of things happened, I think all of our songwriting camps, and I think even the songwriting camps that I was a part of before, in the traditional world, where I saw that problem of music sort of just getting stuck and not coming out, I feel like even those were headless bands. We didn't have the nomenclature for it, and we didn't have maybe the tools to actually flow value in that manner and coordinate in that way, past creating some music. But we converged in a space, we created music together, and that music was really an artifact of that point in time by the collective. And then we try and shove it through these sort of individual, square peg in a round hole, trying to get it through my artist career, Matthew Chame on Spotify. And the music doesn't necessarily fit that aesthetic because it doesn't sound like me, it sounds like us. And so that's where this headless band has evolved into for this project, where this entire project is us, and what is gained by us actually giving that name and giving that, making that the story that we share with the world. And so when Evan first brought this idea of ambient value to our kind of earlier conversations, that really stuck with me because I started to, I guess, feel into what we were doing at Song Camp Core in designing these camps, that we're designing these sort of containers for co-creation to happen. And really where the sort of coordination is happening on a grander scale is really collective execution, at least for the runway of that camp. It's not collective decision making from scratch, where we show up, 77 of us, okay, what do we want to do? It's no, we've already created some sort of buckets, some containers for this stuff to happen, and then the artists come in and can kind of collectively create within those buckets, and all those pieces fit together into the output that we create together. And so that's where the ambient value kind of idea has really stuck for us and the way we think about it
So what are some of those new kinds of value to be captured? Or rather, maybe there were types of values that existed before, but just didn't have a home, didn't have a way to be documented. I think, one of the really cool things about DAOs is that it allows us to recognize and assign value to things that may not be, traditionally elevated in more, like Web 2 or capitalistic structures. So, in the context of SongCamp, what are the types of value that you guys elevate or have the ability to recognize that may be novel to some of the people in this room?
Yeah, well, I think one that a few ideas come up. I think one that I think we're capturing more just Web3 wide, or even maybe kind of condensed into NFTs is it feels like we're capturing the value of resonance in a way that we weren't able to before. The world today kind of, the traditional music industry we could focuses on reach. Everything's mainly about reach, and resonance isn't really something that we have any sort of measuring sticks for. And I think we're able to explore that with NFTs. But maybe beyond that, in the way that we're kind of communally or collectively creating, I think we're able to capture the value of, I think we're able to unlock creativity's potential by bringing people together and them feeling like they are part of a bigger whole and know why they're creating together, know what aspects of this bigger synergy they're creating for, what value they're getting for that. Those collective, those coordination tools are there to allow for that to happen. But then also just the explosion of community that comes from that. And sort of the things you're talking about this data exhaust or just this social capital exhaust that's happening where people are able to jump into these containers, create together, and now high forms of trust, high forms of social capital have been formed, and then they're able to almost kind of coalesce and create together in way more emergent ways because that trust exists and these rails of coordination already exist for them. So we see a good example of that is within the Chaos Project. Within that 77-person group, 45 were musicians. They went through this chaotic form of a songwriting camp over 6 weeks and co-created 45 songs. And then there was so much energy to keep going because that creative explosion happened. And there were all these levels of high trust, people loving each other's music. They just kept creating. And now the Chaos CCO lab has emergently taken shape, and they're creating music that is now being put out with Creative Commons, sort of through a sister brand, if you will, of the Chaos world. So I feel a lot of that value would be lost in the kind of the typical form of just let's come together, let's make some music, and then we all go away, and none of it gets captured, if you will.
Most definitely, and I think you highlighted a really important unfair advantage set of expertise that you bring to the table at SongCamp is the intentional planning for emergence, right? Emergence, of course, happens organically, but you can create conditions that are uniquely well suited to allow for emergent sparks to grow and to snowball and to scale. I imagine that, the idea of coordinating dozens of artists in any kind of organized activity is really daunting, but you've managed to develop these containers in which not only do people feel the psychological safety to be creative and to contribute to one another's ideas, but like you were saying, you've constructed rails that allow that train to roll on out in whatever direction it might be heading, even when you can't anticipate what that's going to look like.
Yeah.
So, what kind of preparation or what kinds of activities or thoughts or guidance do you have for how we in the DAO space can create containers of collaboration, psychological safety, and can set up rails for emergence to scale with intention?
Yeah, something I'm thinking a lot about now, because I think one takeaway for us in our last 2 camps really was the runway that's provided in the sort of container design or pre-camp design that is very kind of thought out by a core few of people, by camp alumni from before, people who are working on this project, someone like me who's investing all my time into this. We're building from high context and putting together a big project that kind of includes a podcast and the songwriting camp piece and the visual art container and then the actual NFT dev and the website. It's all these pieces plug into each other, and it's very freeing for musicians, for instance, who come into this project, who don't feel like they need to confine themselves to the sort of public image that they're putting forth if they're an artist in Instagram land, they could just co-create with these artists that they're crashing into through the songwriting camp. And there is this feeling of safety around the fact that all these people have been curated in. There's like high fidelity of like, you know, one-to-one interviews, making sure people can play nice with each other. And then there's all these plans. And like, oh, wow, I get to plug in and use and it's like, okay, this is my container. These are my 3 walls, and then here's my door. This is my creative outlet to go and create this song, and all these other pieces are happening. So there's like this storm of creation that's happening that you feel like you're a part of. Once we run out of the runway, which is inevitably gonna happen, right? After, you know, we had an 8-week plan, 8 weeks turned to 12 because scopes balloon, and then once we get to the end of that, the sort of like runway of what we designed starts to run out, and the emergence starts to override the container design. And those are the parts where things slow down like crazy, because now we're stepping out of collective execution and stepping into collective decision making. And I think there's a lot of value from that too. We're seeing a lot of energy, for instance, in the Chaos project to push a merch line now and to push the visual art that was used into one-of-ones and all these things. So there's these like subgroups forming to go and continue doing more things. But I think now we're learning how to stand up sort of the continuous paths to emergence. Because yeah, the paths to emergence can't necessarily be emergent themselves. That, like, it gets really stuck in that environment. So that's where we're kind of focused on now, is how do you allow the collective decision making to move almost to the same speed as like the collective execution and like the creative storm that produces.
That's awesome, and it's a great reminder for all of us that, you know, emergence is no substitute for rigorous research and preparation.
Yeah.
Emergence is what we get to enjoy, or what we can enjoy after someone has intentionally set forth a container, a path, a set of resources inside of which we might be more unbridled. But it is out of, you know, confinement and requirements and restriction that we see the bounds of, you know, where we can be creative and we can find an edge and build off that edge. But having, you know, boundless, unstructured freedom can be a hindrance sometimes to your ability to create.
I'm of the mind that, like, and this is maybe goes against some of our like preconceived notion of artists, but I learned through my own experience as a musician, like, I thrive in structure. I like thrive, you know, and like constraints help us focus our creativity to something that is going to maybe be coherent, especially if we're working in a group. And I really felt that kind of on the first songwriting camp that ended up being the intention for Song Camp in general, where my first time going, I wasn't used to working at the speed that we were about to work on. In 5 days, we're put in different groups of 4 or 5, and you have 10 or 12 hours to create a song from scratch every day for 5 days. And I'm like, that's impossible. We're not gonna be able to do that because I never experienced that before in my life. And sure enough, we did. And sure enough, a lot of great music came out of it. And I started to realize, like, oh wow, that structure gave us incredible containers to just focus our creativity on something that the output was incredible for. So I'm a big believer of that sort of pre-camp design. And also, like, the design of expectations has been a big learning. Like, when you're bringing in people to a big project that they're gonna devote themselves to and bring their resources of attention, creativity to, really like meeting people, you know, in a transparent way, and also like trying to figure out all the expectations that are coming into this. And sure enough, you're not gonna meet the full laundry list, because like expectations can run the gamut, but like being able to kind of define like what expectations are maybe coming in from all these artists and people who are going to be a part of this project, and sort of having answers for that on the front end as much as possible. Okay, stop there.
Totally. Well, and I think, you know, one of the interesting challenges that we all face in the DAO space and the idea of collective co-execution and then co-creation is this tension between the individual identity that we bring to the table as a sovereign person and the shared identity that exists as a function of us working together. So, you know, in the context of what we think about a lot at Disco is, you know, your identity, the data that makes you you, is a function of your interactions with other spaces, other groups for the most part. Obviously things like your shoe size, that's pretty specific to you, but, you know, things like the history of places that you visited, the shows that you've gone to, the music that you like. These are all functions of your interactions with others and a shared set of experiences, a shared sense of identity that you want to capture and bring with you because it's something that you want to reuse. It's something that you want to be able to discover other experiences and people based on. So, you know, in the Songcamp ecosystem, what does that transition looked like between, you know, a disparate group of people with unique skill sets, unique capabilities, unique, sometimes very strong individual identities, and how does the container that you've created help enmesh that into a more singular shared experience?
Yeah, I think a big answer that we started to hypothesize in Camp 2 and really developed out in Camp 3 is the idea of story. Like, story ended up being the answer that glued everyone together. And like, so for instance, the story we were kind of telling at first internally and then externally for Chaos was we are becoming this murmuration, this network of one called Chaos, and the idea that we start as 77 individuals, by the end we should be one network. And to give that more life, we sort of manifested that story through a goddess of chaos named Eris, which is a Greek mythological figure. And we started to play into this idea, and it gets kind of cultish or religious, but I think that's maybe good in the DAO space a little bit, not to go too far with it, is the idea that like the goddess of chaos, Eris, who's also called the goddess of discord, by the way, which worked really well since all this is happening in Discord, was sort of the one kind of like that we were all in service to. We are all creating from the goddess of chaos's intentions, and like to almost give up our ego and let ourselves be in service and create the music that Eris wants us to create. That's a very freeing notion for artists, and to like buy into that story and believe that and play into that for a while and sort of let go of that individual self. That being said, then we sort of release the music, and everyone's super interested. You know, it's like all released under Chaos, but it's like, whose voice is that? That's a crazy voice, you know? And that kind of plays into this idea of the reputations that even individual nodes within this network are forming, and being able to surface that as well. And the almost synergistic whole that you are becoming also becomes this launchpad for the individuals to be seen and valued for the work that they contributed to that. So I feel like playing into this balance, being able to play into this balance of nourishing like both this idea of collectively becoming a story that allows you to become this whole, and then also, and I think like disco starts to provide that. Like, I don't think we're at all giving shape to the exhaust that we are giving off in all of our projects yet, but to be able to give that shape and both give that like reputational value, membership value within our ecosystem, and also show that to the world, especially for like the amazing art that these people are co-creating together. So, yeah.
Awesome. And also, fun side note fact, I have not told you this before, I came straight from Burning Man. My Burning Man playa name is Queen Chaos.
Oh,
so,
amazing.
The vibes
We're
just hit
switching
right.
it out from Eris to you. This is huge.
So, you know, one thing that you mentioned earlier is the novelty and importance of being able to understand, document, appreciate resonance. How hard does something slap for you?
Yeah.
And that's really different than, you know, number of wallet addresses, number of connected databases, right? What is the extent to which an experience, piece of content, a contribution is resonant and relevant to your human experience? I like to say a lot that, you know, the atomic unit of Web3 is not a token or a wallet address, it is a human being. You're the same person when you show up to any one of your Ethereum addresses, when you use a Web2 app, when you play around with Solana, when you've tried Tron, if you're into that. And so, you know, meaningfully designing for the human part of our human coordination tools, recognizing that the experience of Ethereum it happens entirely between your chair and the keyboard, means that we need to, or we have the opportunity to think about metrics and priorities like resonance that are specific to a human experience, that are not necessarily just paying off some, you know, VC KPIs so that everybody can feel good about their investments. And so, you know, at Disco, one of the things that we think about in the music space is like, how do we describe resonance or fandom, community participation as an aggregate of more traditional metrics. So right now, let's say I am a huge fan of Flume, as I mentioned earlier, and I go to a lot of his shows, I buy his merch, I pre-save his songs, I listen to him on Spotify, I share his music with my friends, and for each of those activities, the apps underneath and the brand underneath think that I am a different person. There is no way to connect your listening behavior with your, concert attendance behavior, with your sharing, with the Discord stages you may jump on, the NFTs that you buy, right? All of these are totally dissociated, which is bananas because I am the same Evan who shows up for every single one of them. And so at Disco, we're really excited about being able to logically centralize proofs of these different activities around ourselves, to carry them in our data backpacks from one place to another, so that when I show up at a Flume show, I can prove the extent to which all of these activities have been resonant in my life, present in my experience, and I can show up differently than someone who's, new to this particular community, new to this music. And that then, sets the foundation for a different kind of interaction, right? If I'm a super fan, if I'm super engaged in the community, I have interacted with a ton of the music, I'm gonna have a different view on maybe listening to the new album, or who I think should be featured on a new song. And so artists have the ability to finally engage with the people in the room in a way that is no longer blocked by Spotify holding hostage who's listening to their music, by Ticketmaster holding hostage who's in the room when they play shows. So, in this sort of new future where artists and creators can have a better understanding of how resonant their offerings are with their community and what aspects of those are really hitting, what kind of new coordination games or new kinds of interactions does this set us up to explore?
Yeah, that really resonates. I see it on maybe taking it from both sides. So like on the artist side, where that makes me go is when I get, let's say, my Spotify results or what have you at the end of the year, whenever they send it, and or even at the end of the month, they give me my monthly listeners. Sometimes a pretty big number, as far as numbers go. But I don't even blink twice at it because it's just this number. There's nothing. I have no level of interaction with the folks within that number. And even then you get the number of the 117 people you were their most listened to on Spotify, but I can't be friends with those people. Again, it's just this number. And I feel like that lacks the ability to create these relationships where the resonance already lies that we're not able to sort of actually create. And then on the audience side of that thing, right? If you go to Spotify and this is the song that matters the most to you in the world, or it's just something you're listening to passively, you can't interact with the song in any different way. It's just, maybe you could buy the T-shirt of that band or that artist, but you can't interact with that song that matters more to you in any individual way. So at the beginning of this idea of resonance was first okay, the NFT, the one-of-one NFT. I could actually say, here's something I really care about. Money, ETH, that I can use for all sorts of other things that I'm signaling I really care about this song or this edition of this song. That's to me where it begins. But where I think this goes, and we start to see this especially in Camp 2, where we start to bring story into the mix more, is you're able to create a deeper relationship with the audience such that they can interact with the project or the artist in deeper ways where you're not just a passive viewer or listener anymore, but you can participate in the journey of this thing. So the example I give there is in Camp 2, we built this whole story that took place in a Discord where you had to go through this sort of game and learn more about this world where the music that we're creating is coming from, and you're playing your role in actually helping save that world by going through puzzles and solving riddles and listening to music and making choices, all these sorts of things, that by the end, when that music is actually released, sprouted out through the context of that story that you feel a part of, that music resonates with you in a deeper way because you were part of the journey of it getting there. And I think that's what starts to open up for us in these more coordinated worlds that we're creating, where you start to blur the line between the audience and the creator, and that can get extremely, extremely fun. I
love that because the music, the creation, that NFT then really becomes part of the co-creator's identity. Even if you are along to observe part of the journey, having a glimpse behind the scenes means that that content resonates with you, hits with you differently. It's something that you carry with you as part of your experience, your identity. So, we all know that 10K PFP projects took off largely in part because they're very easy to use as a tool of your identity, right? To set up as a profile picture, to represent yourself as a member of this community, because it's like an aesthetic thing that you can very simply and visually, use as your presentation of self. But in the music NFT space, right, you're not going to like put, music NFT as your profile picture. I mean, maybe you will, but like the music is not at the fore of that new sense of identity or augmented sense of identity. So I think the ability to contribute to or observe and process the development of a music NFT means that it has a different role in your identity. But what are some different ways that you think music NFTs can play a role in how we show our identities, whether as creators or as consumers or fans, community members?
Yeah, I think that's a good point related to kind of like, I thought a lot for a long time about this difference between like visual art and music and the difference in those mediums. Like, I think, again, going back to story and like being able to witness the process and journey of the co-creation has been a big part of what we're doing, and I think there's something in parallel with the fact that music is like time-based media, and there's also this relationship we have from music to the musician that I think is a bit different than like the artist to the visual work, and by creating this sort of like more these layers of intimacy for the story of creation of this work and the identity or identities of that creation is where that sort of resonance lies, and creating the paths to actually like signal that becomes more like participatory, as I was saying before. I think also like, at least where we explore kind of the music NFT landscape, a big part of our experiments is not just on like the co-creation of the music, but it's also how we distribute this music through NFTs. What is the actual mechanic we're building there? And the way that we like to think of it is like this Web3 tooling has expanded the creative canvas down to the full stack of how we distribute, contextualize, monetize this work, such that we can create like, this is maybe like a radical opinion, but like the way I see it is like, every album is a new world. Every body of music is a whole new story that's being told. What if the actual ways we distribute that music, the release mechanics, the NFT mechanics that we end up using to put this out and create a participatory or kind of game or whatever you end up building, can those be as unique as the album or the body of music that you're putting out every single time? That we don't need to create a new album and just like, yes, put it through reach modes of Spotify and those sorts of things, put it on the shelves, but then also create a sort of distribution mechanic and contextualization of that body work that is as unique and new for every body of work that we put out too. So those are kind of the things that we are exploring in our projects, yeah.
And I love that, those pursuits are not inherently technical, right? Since the dawn of humanity, human beings have just been trying to vibe with their friends, do cool shit with their homies, and, create interesting experiences that provide delight and value. And pursuing all of these, adjacent containers for narrative, from distribution to, further world builds on top of a piece of media, all of these expressions, basically existed long before the technologies that brought us here today, will persist long after the versions that we have now. And so I think what you're highlighting is that, the human desire for creative experiences and for shared experiences to have a sense of belonging in a shared narrative, right? These are very fundamental impulses and goals. Yeah. And when we use the technology we have available to enhance intentions that already exist, and to allow for collaboration that just isn't easily facilitated by the platforms that we have already, but the desire's already there, that's a really sweet recipe for emergence, as opposed to trying to retrofit forms of human creation to a set of tools that we happen to put together.
Yo.
Right?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Yeah.
So I guess in my sort of the question that I have beyond that is, what is the role of assessing DAO tools when you're trying to create a container for, shared, music, co-creation, things that are of an inherently artistic nature? How does one assess a tech stack that is not going to conflict with creative intention and desire, and is going to lead to a space of emergence?
Yeah, those are kind of like my favorite like sandboxes to play in and like figure out for as we design our camps. I like to think of it that like we're able to just like, I mean, I guess, it's all composable and like these Lego blocks. I like to think of it for whatever reason as like we're like scotch taping things together, because it feels like we're just kind of like taking the tools at our disposal and putting them together for our camp. So for instance, the first camp, at that time, we just like wanted to put out a one-of-one music NFT and auction it off on a 24-hour auction. And even that wasn't necessarily built yet to like fully just happen easily. So we got Catalog and Mirror to plug into each other such that we could execute that idea. All the way to now, we're starting to plug in with like OX splits and Coordinate and all these ways of building interesting and sort of distributed value flow models for a camp of 77 people, how we flow value through that project, and starting to build also on our own, like build our own sort of custom dev teams to actually build our custom contracts and how we're actually going to release these NFTs, which is what we really did for Chaos. So I feel like there's a lot of projects and tools that want to work with like these, just like I would consider Songcamp in its own right like a power user of Web3. And so we just like get to plug in with these different teams and to figure out how to actually do like edge case work with the tools that they're providing, which is very empowering also for the artist, right? Like it's not like needing to go through STEM distributor to like try to get like someone to pitch your song to Spotify in some like opaque manner that probably never happened. We're actually like playing in this very young and nascent field where we can talk to the teams. They're downstairs, they're in the room, about what we want to happen, and like they're ready to like help set that up. So yeah, that's very empowering.
So, what I'm hearing is that this process of choosing the right tools and setting forth these rails really starts with human experience. What is the friction that you're running into, and then finding the right set of tools or combination or stack of things to be able to alleviate that friction or to allow you to do activities that you weren't able to otherwise, as opposed to inheriting a set of tools and then trying to build your experiences around what those can do.
Totally, yeah. Big time.
Yeah, I think in Web3, there's like a tension, right? Because we've got a lot of projects that were built out of a thought experiment without a specific user in mind, and then we run around with the hammer looking for a sweet nail, and sometimes it turns into a DeFi pool and we get rich, and that's really great.
Yeah.
But more often than not, we sit in spaces like this, we express our frustration and our friction, and we have difficulty finding the right tools that are going to be well suited to ease our journey and ease our collaboration. So, as you noted in the DAO space, the fact that you gather a bunch of people together, that means you can be a singular power user as a collective, right? And your shared use not only is valuable for the adoption of nascent and early products, shaping their roadmaps in a way that's going to be relevant, but it also is a pretty intense way to battle test a process, to battle test tools, is to have them, be the foundation upon which a group as large as Chaos, 70 plus people rely. So, in adopting these new processes and leveraging these new tools with people who are just starting to work together, what are some of the ways that, you have found setting the intention, setting the vibe, to be especially meaningful or successful? And it can be something as small as ritual, something as formal as a spreadsheet, but if everything is net new that we're bringing to the table, from the people to the objectives to the tools to the language that we're using, what else do we need to add into the mix in order for something like a Songcamp to come out and for everybody to have a positive experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think rituals are a huge thing and something we think about a lot. The biggest and most central one is we have a weekly community call that we call our Heartbeat Call every Monday at 4 p.m. Eastern. It's been happening for 75 Mondays, and we haven't missed a heartbeat, because I really do find it's the heartbeat of our community, and has been that rhythm, that drumbeat that's needed in a space that can be very volatile and very, like, even our projects, we have huge, expansive sort of inhales where we're in camp mode, and huge exhales where we don't have a lot going on, but like the heartbeat stays consistent. I feel like in these ethereal sort of disorienting spaces in our discords and that sort of thing, something that we can kind of like call our own, and so much of our own like sort of like inside jokes and like memes and stuff and even some project ideas that have taken shape have like really sprouted from that Schelling point for our community. And I like, it's very simple, but I think it's incredibly integral to our ability to keep going.
Anchor your community in the ritual of memes. Heard it here first.
Boom.
So I think that is all of our time for today. Thank you so much for jamming with me.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for being here, friends. We'll see you in the metaverse.
Up next is Nemo from Daedalus and Citadel. Hi, from Citadel.
Sounds great. Thank you. Thank you all.
Yo, up top, that was super fun.
Howdy doody.
He'll get the, both of us will.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Even better.
Everybody's already seen me, so. Yeah, that's right. Okay.
You use that one, I'll give him this one.
Nemo, tell us a joke.
And I wouldn't advise that. I'm coming from the Balkans, so political correctness is not one of the good options for
All right, amazing. Heindel from Citadel.
Yeah.
Nemo from Daedalus. Nemo is, I had to escape the Schengen zone for a couple of weeks, and I met Nemo there. Never knew what a strange human being would be out there, to be honest. And I'm glad for him to be joining us today.
Oh,
Hey.
you got a mic, yeah.
Hi everyone. Still alive, still kicking? Okay, good. Happy to hear that. So, as Pete said, my name is Nemo. I am part of numerous things. The main thing that I'm building right now is called Nimi. So Nemo building Nimi. It's a Web3 social aggregator. So yeah, anybody with DNS domain can make their own static page, link in bio type of page, where everything is stored on IPFS and then content hash updated on DNS. So yeah, check out nimi.io. I also am part of the Daedalus Angel Collective that operates for the last 2 years, investing in the Web3 space, and running a couple of things in Lobster DAO, which is a big DeFi town hall chat on Telegram, right? So today, Haim, do you want to introduce yourself before we kick in?
Yeah, can everybody hear me? All right, I'm Heimdall. I handle economic design at Citadel. It's a space-based on-chain game DAO.
Yeah. So our topic today is P2E governance and why governance matter for self-sovereign virtual economies and for the long-lasting economies. And one interesting fact that started happening in the last 2 years was this expansion of the gaming ecosystem inside of the blockchain space. And interesting thing that started happening is, logically, we had like all of different experiments. And one of the main experiments that kind of like took over from the DeFi side was different liquidity minings and farmings that were tried to be implemented. But the challenges that started popping up left and right is, of course, take with a grain of salt, this is just my opinion, but one of the biggest issues is the team started paying attention more about the token farming than actually how exciting the games are. And if you're looking about like the history of gaming, in order to have a successful game, you first need to build the community and the narrative and everything around your storyline, and then actually think about the next steps. So, hey, with that in mind, like, what's your opinion? Like, what are some of the important aspects for people that are building different games to have for the long-lasting economies?
So in terms of, in my opinion, in terms of building a long-lasting virtual economy, what's particularly important in crypto economies is trying to build in a way for it to be intrinsic value in the ecosystem. So the reason being, obviously for sustainability, but you also want to have player retention because what you kind of see in these crypto economy-based games is once the value starts leaving the ecosystem, it creates kind of a spiraling downward effect of losing the player base and value leakage out of the ecosystem. So you really want to try to contain value in the ecosystem as best you can.
Mm-hmm. One of the interesting aspects that I want to add, what Citadel did, at least when I was researching, reading about you guys, so we are already well accustomed to audits when it comes to the DeFi projects and generally like security audits that we are doing in the blockchain space. But one interesting thing that you guys actually did was also the gaming economy audit. So can you walk us through that partnership and what you guys did, which platform you used, like how that process looks like?
Yeah, so we engaged an economy audit firm called Machinations. Shout out to Matthew and Cesar. Basically what they did is they took all the inputs and the ideas around balancing the game assets and things and put it into their software system that they use to run Monte Carlo simulations, basically thousands and thousands of simulations, running all of our variables through algorithms to kind of gather information whether our economy would be sustainable in the long run. So we were lucky, actually, as we were developing our economy, they actually came out with this program kind of alongside us, and we were one of 15 games that were able to be initially in this game economy health program. To date, actually, we're the only game to pass the economy health audit. But yeah, it's so important, I think, because you're dealing with real value in your community's real money to do everything you can to make sure that the value will not leak out of the ecosystem. And so that's why when we saw this, we jumped on it. We were like, this is perfect. There's, as a team of builders who are creating a project to be decentralized and last as long as possible and have longevity and sustainability, anything you can do to make sure that what you're creating is going to be sustainable, you should do, right? And then we've even hired them on a retainer to work with the DAO and be in a long-term partnership to monitor our economy and to build APIs and take real data from the blockchain and feed that into their simulation model to make sure that we are staying on track, so.
It's really generally interesting for me because it's kind of like a whiteboard, right? Like we started trying to implement in the classical gaming economies, we tried to implement the blockchain perspective and all of this tokenization that started going on for a longer time. An interesting aspect there that I'm seeing is that, in my opinion, not many people and not many teams are stressing enough about the whole narrative of their game and their ecosystem that they're trying to build. Like constantly what I'm seeing, and one of the challenges that I'm experiencing also with the Daedalus Angels whenever I'm jumping on a call with the different gaming teams is like, I'm curious to learn from them what are some interesting aspects that they already see in the governance models across the ecosystem that are working or they like and what they don't like. Mm-hmm. And to my shock still, and I hope that that will change, I'm seeing most of the people actually not giving enough attention to research what teams such as like, I don't know, Axis, Illuvium, Aavegotchi, Treeverse, Aurori, all of these teams, what are the concepts that they're experimenting with, where they are with that, what was good, what was bad, what was working, what was not working. And in my opinion, that's the beauty of our Web3 ecosystem, that you can publicly access to all of this data, public access to all of this research, and re-implement that instead of reinventing the wheel. So for me, one of the interesting aspects when I was researching was when Illuvium was, if I remember correctly, when Illuvium was building the council for the Illuvium, interesting thing that happened was they implemented quadratic voting in the whole system, and how that influenced their whole system and voting in that moment was that a person that was voted by a couple of main whale wallets that person, if there wasn't a quadratic voting in that particular system, would get like roughly 46% of all of the votes, versus when they implemented quadratic voting and gave more power to the smaller fish in the sea, that person got like just 12% of the vote. So for me, the curious, interesting mechanisms is like quadratic voting for some example. Of course, I guess that for some things it's not good, for some things it's good, we still need to research. But in your opinion, like what are some of the interesting concepts that you see across the spectrum in the Web3 space that you believe we should double down and research more and try to implement and experiment in the gaming ecosystems?
Yeah, so at Citadel, we're approaching how we handle governance and votes a little bit differently. I think the quadratic voting is interesting. I think that when we were designing the initial economic loop, we felt it was very important to tie direct ownership of the treasury to the governance assets. And we kind of find an issue with the highly liquid ERC20 governance model. And so we designed around how can we solve people controlling too much of the ecosystem and then threatening decentralization. Because another thing that we think is important for a sustainable long-term ecosystem is decentralization, of course. And all that is adding natural friction to acquiring additional governance stake and equity. So the game pieces are the governance stake. The NFT ships in our game are all one vote, just like nouns. And it's inefficient for you to own more than a certain amount of ships. You only have so much time to play. And so sure, you could acquire 100 ships, but are you going to be able to play all those ships efficiently? So there's a sort of natural friction there that we probably won't see people acquiring 1 or 2 or 3% of the network voting power. Again, it's possible. We never know what's going to happen. This is all theoretical, but we didn't want to do anything that felt like a hard cap. We wanted to take sort of like a hands-off approach to managing our economy, our governance, and everything. We are the team, but we're just part of the community after launch, in true, Web3 decentralized fashion. So that's kind of how we're handling it. Yeah.
One interesting aspect that you added there, and I know when we were discussing yesterday and today, generally of your approach in Citadel, is like how much you guys want to double down on the community side and how much you want to push the responsibility back to those people. Now, when I had a aha moment was, if we're talking about any ecosystem, and especially when we're talking about story mode ecosystems, which I believe any gaming narrative is, you kind of like want to immerse people in that whole experience. You want that people to immerse in your world that you're building, in your whole platform and everything. So I'm curious, like, how you guys plan to double down on the community side? Like, what are some of the responsibilities, the low-hanging fruit, that you believe that you can involve community as much as possible, as early as possible, to help you build the ecosystem?
Yeah, there's so much you can do. I would like to just talk about how important community is for a second, because we know that gamers are some of the best game designers. You just harken back to like Warcraft 3 and the map editor. Somebody created Dota, which spawned League of Legends, which is one of the most popular games in the world right now. Or DayZ, they came up with the Battle Royale, and then we have Fortnite now. I don't know if anybody played The Thing on StarCraft, but that basically spawned Among Us. Not a lot of people know that. So we want to bootstrap the community and give them all the tools that they need to build whatever they can dream, right? And we want to give them the funds directly, That's why we go with this direct equity stake via the game pieces. The players are the owners of the ecosystem and the DAO, right? So one of the ways we're going about doing that is we're creating a bunch of day zero proposals, right? We could add it beforehand, but we want to show players how we would create a proposal and how to format it and what's possible, right? We have art proposals, we have game design proposals, economic proposals, all sorts of things, right? And that's just, you can give somebody a DAO, right? But they're going to show up and they're going to be like, what do I do now, right? But if you show them, okay, this is what you can do, this is what's possible, I feel like there's more agency there. And when you create a clear line, I feel like, of ownership over the game, right? Because my ship is my ship. It's unique. I can name it whatever. I can name it the Gambler. I'd probably name mine the Gambler. Don't steal my name. But there's clear ownership. There's agency. People are incentivized to create for the game because it's the game that they can grow to love and build out and, you know, design. Just like in any, you know, just like any custom map creator or anything from the past. So that's what we're hoping for and growing towards. And those are the kinds of people that we're looking to attract to our DAO.
I'm also curious to hear your thoughts. So more and more for the last, like, let's say 10 months, I have this aha moment around service DAOs. To give you an example, what I mean by service DAO is like Strider DAO or Zipsy that basically take over a certain part of the work that needs to be done for the particular ecosystem, and they kind of like deploy whatever their assets. So like in Strider, it's more about the community and helping out you as a gaming ecosystem to grow from there, to get more people excited, to build the stories, to build the art, so on and so forth, whereas Zipsy is more like around the design. So how do you see the future of potentially collaborations between the ecosystems such as yours with the service DAOs that potentially can bring all of these big guns in particular spheres?
Yeah, I mean, we're already engaging another DAO, a service DAO, Macro. I believe they spoke earlier today. They're going to be working with us in a long-term partnership. They're providing a high-level, you know, security audit on our code. We already got actually an audit originally, but because we care about our community so much, we want to make sure that this thing is as solid as it can be before launch and is literally built to last, you know. But so yeah, so we're working with Macro, and we hope to be working with them for a long time to come.
I definitely feel that there is like an interesting narrative that can play out somehow in the next 2 years around this service DAOs. Of course, we have like a lot of things to learn and to figure out how all of this will work, but definitely I'm curious to see how these things will develop. Like a larger community that is focused on a particular set of tasks, whether people will be around the stories, whether about the art, whether about coding, audit, security. So it will be really curious to see how that will play out, this composability that we have with the DAOs. But one also interesting part for me regarding the communities is one of the big obstacles that we're constantly hearing, at least through the mainstream media still, is because of the, I think, lack of education and lack of easiness to enter the Web3 space, there is a huge gaming community that are challenging the whole concept of the NFTs being part of the gaming ecosystems, blockchain being part of the gaming ecosystem, and kind of like this narrative that they're not super excited about the blockchain space, right? And now, looking how the time is passing by, I see more and more, in my opinion, that right now, I wouldn't say that all of the people that are inside of the crypto space will be the players of all these great games. Some of them will be speculators, some of them will be maybe players, but I think that the vast majority of the players will come because of the game totally outside of this ecosystem. Have you guys thought about the onboarding experiences about this and how you can actually approach to get as many as possible people outside of the Web3 to enter to Web3 through the Citadel?
We have thought about it for sure, but I feel like the sort of game that we're creating is for the more hardcore, you know, crypto native video game players. You know, a lot of us who are in this space, we played games in the 90s. We played Diablo, we played Warcraft, we played EVE Online. You know, we're looking for people who grew up playing games like that, who are now into DAOs or into crypto, and they see a game like this that's a very simple game. We call it a minimum viable game. Very, very simple, resource-based, economic game loop that's multiplayer and skill-based and all these things above. But we want that really hardcore base to help us grow the game, and actually, in the future, maybe we'll onboard people and create more entry-level opportunities and economic loops and game loops and stuff like that. There's definitely a certain type of game that's going to be the ones to onboard the larger user base of video game players. I see it probably as being games that bootstrap a crypto economy on top of a Web 2 game, such as skins, and just really monetizing player value and player time in a very simple way where they don't need their own ERC20 token to inflationary incentivize people for playing basic game loops. But yeah, that's probably the core way I'll see it, because doing something like NFT skins is much easier to manage economically, right? But just basic scarcity and just having the right metrics, and it's pretty easy to do. But yeah, I see something more of like a Web 2.5 kind of game, onboarding the masses rather than us.
Yeah. Interesting, because like we had this discussion with inside of the NIMI team that I mentioned before. One of the things that I love to kind of like suggest generally founders is to postpone the tokenization as long as possible, generally for whatever they're doing, as much as possible, as long as possible, to actually give a time, give space, give opportunity to think about the mechanics and how they actually can leverage the token economy of whatever sort in the future. Now, I know that sometimes it's a bit challenging depending on the team and depending on the type of product, but I do think that for the especially for the gaming ecosystem, I do believe that it's more about, is the game fun, and will people come back to actually be part of this whole game, or it'll be just like one more new farm for them that they will play with that a bit and just go away from there. And with that in mind, like, what are some of the key ingredients, in your opinion, that you can suggest other teams that are also in your shoes, like you guys right now, how actually to approach the building of the governance for the next like couple of years? Like, what are the steps, how you guys approach that? Like, how you're thinking of what are the most important steps to nail down before actually like doing the whole show?
I think you want to be clear about what you're trying to do with your game. Are you trying to onboard the masses, or are you trying to create a very core kernel of hardcore enthusiasts, like us? Just be clear what you're trying to do, and otherwise you're going to end up in some sort of gray middle ground trying to do both. We take it to the max. We want fully on-chain everything that's possible. We want to last as long as Ethereum lasts. We want this game to be playable in 10 years or 20 years, possibly, and be built upon during that whole time, and to contain value and accrue value over that period. It's possible, right? This sort of like infinite game. But yeah, I guess that's the best advice I could give, is just be clear and do everything you can and build a real community, right? Don't do these, marketing tactics where you get like alpha caller groups to give whitelists and do tweets and, if you want to do that, you can do it. But I think it's better to get people excited, bring them into your Discord, tell them what you're doing, have them give ideas to your team. Like, we created an entire Discord bot, from scratch, that people in our Discord can submit ideas that go directly to the team reads them, and then the team gives feedback. And then we've utilized a lot of those ideas over the last 8 months, put them straight into the game, A lot of those people kind of came up to our higher Discord role called the Architect's Apprentice, because we appreciate their feedback. And when we go about designing new things, we go directly to them. What do you guys think about this, right? Because in legacy games, you see this clear disconnect between the developers, the player base, and the company and the shareholders, right? And I think we even start to see that now between, you have NFT holders, but then you have the governance token holders, and you starting to see a disconnect there, because the governance token holders are now the shareholders, and they're taking this sort of, company-esque position. So, yeah, build a really strong community, take care of them, do everything you can to make sure that this game is going to be, secure for the long term.
Yeah. I definitely remember there was like this big project that built a huge community called BitConnect, so definitely people can learn from but no, like, joke aside, like one interesting thing for me is, and what we are seeing with the DAOs generally for the last couple of years is, a challenge of voters' apathy in the governance. And looking at the future of the GameFi and the gaming ecosystem, what are, in your opinions, way how we can fight the voter apathy? How we can actually work on that people deeply care about their ecosystems and actually want to vote in those ecosystems?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, just make sure that they feel heard, you know? Like I said, you know, we take feedback all the time, and we don't just go around just building stuff, you know, we talk to the community. Jackson, you know, he's got 45,000 messages in our Discord. The guy's crazy. He's in there all the time talking to people, you know? So knowing your community is super important, making them feel valued and giving them the tools that they need. Because if you're a part of a DAO and you don't feel like you can contribute, why would you vote either, right? Sort of like voter apathy in America. People feel like they're not heard. And so you have 46% of the voters, voting age population, not voting, right? They're the largest population of voters, bigger than Democrats or Republicans or whatever party you're in. So it's not just a problem here, it's a problem in the entire world. So you need to make your community feel heard, give them the tools that they need to contribute, and give them a mission to build around. You know, we have a game, right? It's not just a DAO, but we've got this game. And the DAO is actually the bigger part of the ecosystem. We see the game as a very small part. The treasury is the most important thing because it backs the whole ecosystem. And viewing this kind of treasury-first approach, you know, it's an amazing concept that's not possible in the real world. A trustless treasury that's shared by all these different people. I mean, yeah, I'm sure, you know, many people here have talked about it before, and I'm just kind of like a broken record probably, but it's something new, and it enables a whole new economic design that's never been possible before. And so appreciate that and build around it and strengthen it, you know, and that's the way you can contain value, we believe, you know, and that's what we've designed around. And if you can keep the value there, you can make your community feel heard, you give them a mission to build around, I feel like maybe there won't be so much voter apathy. I don't know. We'll see. Again, it's all theoretical. We haven't launched yet, but you know, we have a really active community, and yeah.
Okay, and the last thing from my side is, so from multiple DAOs that either I'm contributor to, or that I'm paying attention to, or I have friends that are telling me of the situation. One interesting thing that started happening is like, oh, we had this amazing DAO, and let's open up a Discord server, and now we have a flood of God knows how many people, and we have all of these channels that are total mess, discussion, 46,000 messages, so on and so forth. And a lot of cases, both for me and both in the other DAOs, what I saw is people starting to be kind of like not hanging out because they feel like a lot of discussions there are spammy, and you then have like people that got there excited, started contributing in some way, whether answering somebody else's question, whether making some art, whether making like question and answers, but like whatever, FAQs, so on and so forth. But in some moment, they feel flooded by all of the things. Yeah. So more and more, what I personally feel is, even if you can have like a public DAO and open the discussion for everybody, you kind of like want to get your highest focus enthusiasts around your project, put them in some smaller group, put them in some certain chat where they can freely discuss between each other as people that are contributing and delivering on the things. Yeah. How do you guys feel about all of these challenges that I mentioned right now with this public and private and contributors and spams and whatnot?
Well, yeah, we feel really strongly about the Discord thing. I mean, how many times you go into Discord and there's like 800 channels and you don't know where to go, and so then you just leave. And then also you're getting pinged an announcement every single hour, and then you go to check this Discord and there's 800 pings, and you're like, I don't want to go in this Discord because now I have to check all these pings, right? So I would say we have a minimum viable Discord in addition to our minimum viable game. We keep it very clean. We have all our resources in one channel, and it's another bot built from scratch that you can has drop-down menus and all these things. You can find all the resources. Keeps it very simple. But not only that, after we launch the game, I mean, we're gonna have like regional chats. So actually you probably only see like 3 or 4 channels after we launch. And then depending on where your ship goes, you'll get a new voice chat and you'll get a new text chat, right? You'll say, I'm in region 1 or I'm in region 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. And you'll it'll be kind of cool. It'll be like running to your friends in the hall, you know, right? Like, you're like, oh, like your buddy shows up in region 1, you couldn't see that before. You didn't know where he was on the map. So it's kind of cool. We're going about that in a I would say an entirely new sense, right? Because we felt like, yes, Discords can be way too disorganized in a sense. It actually creates like user apathy in a sense, right? So we like to keep it very clean. And I recommend doing that. I think it's much more, it creates more discussion, I feel like, there's not like this split of some people on this channel and some people on this channel. Like we have everybody in our station chat, right? And that's the main discussion forum, right? We have some other channels like questions and ideas and stuff like that, but that's pretty much it.
Okay. Because this chair is like syncing like all my bags and like all the assets that I have, I think that we can wrap up now. So just tell the guys if anybody's interested to try Citadel or help out or just test the game or whatnot, like where they can find you guys.
Yeah, you can. Probably the easiest way would be to go to our Twitter. Is that at the Citadel game? Yep. And then you can find our Discord, our website, and all that stuff from there. Yeah, and yeah, we'll be in the chat all the time. You can come find us there, talk to us. You can ask me any questions you have, or Fleet Commander, any of our developers. We're all very active. So, yeah.
Okay, nice.
Yeah,
thank you very much.
Yeah, man.
Okay.
DAO tools.
Yeah, do we need more DAO tools?
And I feel like there's a lot of places to start with that.
Yeah.
Which is, why is everything named a DAO tool to start with? And how much do we hate the label DAO tools?
Yeah, I think that's a good place to start. I'm going to actually take us back even further.
Let's do it.
Than that.
Please.
Because I love this quote. I've always loved this quote. But like in 1882, the commissioner of the US Patent Office said that they were probably going to have to wind down the patent office. They were going to like have to close the patent office in a few years.
What?
Because everything that you could invent had been invented. And they were like, done, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of feel like that is a lot along the same lines of, are there enough DAO tools?
Yeah.
Where it's almost kind of like a small question, right? The question is almost too small. Is there enough DAO tools for when, right? Like today, tomorrow, and you know, when you think about it, when people talk about like, you know, to your point, like what are DAO tools? Why do we call it DAO tools? Also really a great question, right? Like,
yeah.
People start to think about, you know, what are DAOs? And people, if you've noticed, I'm sure folks out here in the audience here have noticed that, you know, these lights are really bright, have noticed that people call anything a DAO, right?
Yeah.
So if you kind of reframe it like that, then the question kind of becomes, are there enough tools for anything?
That's the question that we should be focusing on today.
Are there enough tools for anything?
Should the patent office initiate closing down the office again?
Yeah, you know, definitely. You know, definitely close the patent office. We do not need any more DAO tools. But I think the question that people might really be asking themselves when they think about that, but haven't thought really very far in the process, is this what DAOs are always going to look like?
Yeah.
Right? And you know, we're doing a lot of work on like what the future of DAOs may look like and how the future of like sub-organizations may look like. And I think, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, but you probably feel that that is a whole new design space that has a lot ahead of it.
Yeah.
And it's pretty difficult to say that we're done, right?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think when we think about like DAO tools, I feel like we're thinking of it from the wrong way. And I think
Uh-oh.
that was my cue that I should stop talking.
DAOs.
I feel like we're thinking about it the wrong way, where I think some of the hate the DAO tools have gotten, I'm using the word hate.
Strong word.
Strong word.
Strong word.
But there's been a lot of bad vibes around the framing of DAO tools.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that just comes from some of the like skeuomorphic replications that we see in people seeing essentially kind of like these Web 2.5 tools where it's like blank for Web3, blank for crypto, which is like cool, and that offers something potentially in itself, but is that actually like pushing the boundaries of what we're enabling with this future like DAO concept, which I also agree, like the fact that we can't all agree on a shared definition of what that thing is maybe where we should start. But I think that's been like a big part, as some people might have known. I'm co-founder of Metropolis. We recently rebranded from the cute little orcas of the ocean. I know. We're all going to miss the orcas of the ocean. But I think a big part of our rebrand was really thinking about how we can make this more accessible and legible to people. And John, my co-founder and partner, thought a lot about how can we make them more legible. He thought a lot back to like Steve Jobs and how he made the personal computer more accessible to people. Because at the time, no one really understood what that was or what that was going to enable. And he actually had to like really help people understand what that was going to do. And so we thought about it from the same way. Steve Jobs made the comparison from the personal computer to a bicycle. We started thinking about how DAOs can be digital cities and creating this sort of more legible way to think about what DAOs enable. And I mean, I think when you think of it from a more expansive place like that, like I really feel like it has a much more like abundant design process when you think of DAOs as digital cities. There are these abundant networks, these places of connection, connectivity, diversity, opportunity, all of these things. Then like the options of tools and infrastructure is really endless.
Yeah. I like something you mentioned there when you talked about like the skeuomorphic nature of a lot of the current DAO tooling. You see people building, you know, it's like Facebook for Web3, or it's like, you know, AT&T for Web3, or it's like, you know, Instagram for Web3. And these primitives are pretty useful, I think, to get people over this like initial, like, okay, what is it that I'm dealing with? Although maybe the audience isn't right. Like pretty frequently, I think a lot of this sort of like, the way a lot of DAO tools are positioned is more marketing speak for investors, where they're trying to get across to investors that, oh, this thing is, well, you know, you normally go and talk to investors depending on where they are in the space, and they can be a little bit outside of the DAO sphere, and it can be difficult to explain to folks what it is. So that we rely on these sort of like crutches on what these things do. Whether or not these are actually solving problems are kind of interesting. You see pretty often that people like to reboot successful ideas, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's solving a problem, right? Like I don't know if we need Facebook, but you know, with NFTs. Although you know now I guess Instagram has enabled essentially you know Facebook with NFTs, right? Is that a useful DAO primitive?
Yeah.
Maybe, maybe not, right? It also depends on who we're talking to as DAO primitives, right? But for bigger tools, when we talk about expansive ideas, right? So at Metropolis, you're thinking about digital cities and the mapping of that, right? At Tally, I'm a co-founder of Tally, we're thinking a lot about how you build modular organizations, right? How we bring modularity into how people are organizing themselves. Because when we do talk about DAOs and we use this really expansive you know, shape and form of the word, where it's like, yeah, me and my buddy, we're a DAO, and like, you know, my wife and I and my kid, we're a DAO, and then like, you know, I bought a Uniswap, I'm in this like DAO, I don't know if you know, it's pretty big, it's called Uniswap, right? Like, when we do that, the tooling starts to make sense that it could be anything, and therefore it's all available to us, right? Like, one of the #1 tools for DAOs today is Notion, right? Another one is Discord. These aren't even the skeuomorphic Web 2.5 versions of these things. So you can see that there's a lot of space available to create tools that are going to be more specific to what we may build in the future. Because a lot of what we've built today isn't the end state. So yeah, are there enough DAO tools today for Compound? Yeah, maybe. Like, I would say that's probably pretty possible. But are there enough DAO tools for like the future module versions, modular like organizations for you know entire like you know looking at DAOs and organizations like cities? I would probably say not yet.
Yeah. Well, I think that brings up the point too of like the phase in DAOs in which we're at. Like we're very much on like phase like V0 or V1 potentially. Like the monolithic DAO is where we're at. Like the compound governor contract, which obviously Tally like really helps promote and makes more accessible to users. And that is like the only standard of DAOs right now. And that's the only way in which we see DAOs operate. So it makes sense that we're seeing a lot of these more skeuomorphic DAO tools because we only see one form in which we're trying to create support for. So I think something I think a lot about with DAO tools is less about maybe what current needs they're trying to solve, or I guess it's more about like I think the design choices that these tools are making. Like if you want to be like a Web 2.5 like Facebook for Web 3, you should totally do that. But I think the thing for me is, are you building that in a way that supports the dynamicism of building on chain and having this open, composable, and modular data that building on blockchains enables? And I think it's something really interesting for you as Tally is like this massive data aggregator. Like the data that you guys aggregate is like insane. Like the amount of shit that is pumping through like your guys' backend is pretty wild. And so I'm curious how you think about like data interoperability in future DAO tools and making sure that that is something that we continue to prioritize, or like why it's important?
Yeah. Yeah, so first of all, all our data at Tally is on-chain based data, right? So we're always indexing on-chain data. We're starting to move into more off-chain solutions, but right now what we index is all on-chain. So these are things that are natively available to anyone who's looking at the blockchain. What's kind of becoming apparent is that communities produce a lot of data, right?
Yeah.
And they produce a lot of interactions. And in DAOs, especially DAOs that are governed by token governance, each kind of action of transferring tokens can represent like a transference of like governance power, right? And this actually brings up a really interesting sort of new space in the design sort of like thinking for DAOs, where a lot of DAO voting power, when we're talking about on-chain DAOs, which is a really narrow piece of the DAO pie, right? A lot of on-chain voting power is actually concentrated inside other applications, right? So a lot of people are thinking today about how to open up the possibility of voting power that gets locked up in things like Yearn or Uniswap or things like that to make that more accessible to users and participate in the system. And certainly that is just an entire new level of like DAO tools necessary for that. But I would actually flip it back on less on like the data aspect of DAOs, but when we're talking about the tooling necessary, there is, on the on-chain realm, I have lately kind of started to come to the feeling that we may have outrun the user, right? Like in Web3, we tend to have a lot of really exciting ideas, we experiment with a lot of new primitives, we build a lot of new things, but our user base isn't always necessarily where we are at yet, right? So a lot of tooling...
A la OpenSea in the dead of winter,
of course,
with no
perfect
users.
Perfect example, right? Like the people who were most successful in the most recent bull run for NFT tooling had been doing it for years in obscurity and you know, no one knew about them. No one knew that it was going to be a big thing. So you kind of have the same thing now around with DAO tooling, where many people are building to futures where the users haven't reached yet.
Yeah.
Right? And that's a pretty important distinction because, especially in a bear market, that can feel like there are too many DAO tools, right? It may feel like, oh, there's too many token gating this, there's too many primitives this, too many of that. But it may not be as much a question of there being too many of them as it is where maybe the users just don't get it yet, man, right? Like maybe they're still way back in like, you know, just the first versions of token voting. They just want to show up and get a wallet. You know, recently a partner of ours, Seraph, they actually left the Web3 space to go back to managing their community, not using NFTs, because they found that the onboarding process for users to their community was so difficult that the technology, the DAO tooling there, had actually outrun where their user base was at today, right?
Yeah.
So I think when we talk about like, do we need more DAO tooling? It's also a real question of, is this DAO tooling being thoughtful about where we are today, right now, versus where we would like the users to be?
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of builders that are thinking in that way, though. Like, I know we think a lot about that at Metropolis, is like we have a very, I think, specific vision of where we think we're going, but we also recognize there's like a very, very, very long bridge to help users get there. So we're not dumping this like mega vision that we have that I think is aligned with a lot of people in the space on them from day one. I think there is a real responsibility on a lot of DAO tooling providers to help bridge us there. Like I think other players that are doing similar work is like Meta Label, like, you know, thinking about this dynamic future of like record labels and these creative sort of co-ops, but we're not just like jumping to that future. There's a way in which we have to step people there eventually. Like, I think like Disco is another good example. Station, like these are all projects that I think are really thinking very deeply about building scalable solutions while also recognizing how nascent our user base is and that it actually is a process in which we have to build them up to where things start to become really powerful, I think.
Yeah, I think also when we talk about DAO tooling, sort of bringing it back a little bit earlier, we're talking about like DAOs and how the definition is very loose. People are also experimenting with a lot of different kinds of DAOs, right? So you have folks that are trying to do investment clubs. You have people who are building what we, at Tally, we call internet native startups, where people are now looking at building corporations entirely on the blockchain, right, versus going to somewhere like Delaware and registering there. But then you also see people building, impact startups or kind of impact DAOs, where they're trying to do all sorts of different things. And their use cases are so myriad that it's really difficult to say, hey, this is a cookie cutter solution and this is going to be enough for you, right? Because, if you use any, even there's the sort of just aspect of like how users interact with tools, right? So Airtable is a really incredible, powerful tool for doing these like dynamic databases, right? I don't use it. I know that it's really powerful and a lot of other people love it and use it and stuff like that. I can't get my mind around it, so I just don't use it, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people use Notion. I will also admit to like never figuring out how to really use Notion. I know that sounds crazy.
Dennis,
but
it's a boomer problem.
It's just like, there's too many options, right? They're like, build whatever you want. And I'm like what? They're like, you could make it really pretty. I'm like, make what pretty? What am I building, right?
Yeah.
But so when you think about it, there's other tools, like Notepad, which is brilliant. Like this, it's like, and in terms of like a DAO tool that's just like solid, Notepad brings all the features that I need to like my work in the community, right?
Yeah.
But would you have said back in like 1988 that like now that we have Notepad, we're like done with DAO tooling? Like clearly, no, because also how users interact with it, who reaches them first about it, what they get their minds around on it, is also a really big part of the process there.
Yeah. I think one thing I've been thinking a lot about though is I think a big part in why we haven't seen this like maximum velocity around DAOs and the adoption of DAO tools is the interoperability piece. Like when you think about all of the biggest waves that we've seen in crypto, like DeFi, NFTs, we kind of had like this micro DAO cycle, whatever, is that those were all built around a standard. So like DeFi was a standard that, or was a whole wave of activity that emerged around ERC20 token. And it was a standard that was adopted across the DeFi space. And like, for example, Compound actually, their original like protocol version 1 had a version of the ERC20 token that was not interoperable across the space.
Oh, right, I did not.
Yeah, and they had to completely redo the architecture and redo the protocol for Compound v2 because the way in which they were using the ERC20s was not interoperable across the space. So like, why would I go like, dump my ERC20s in Compound without the ability to transfer it over to Aave, Uniswap, all these things. But it was this natural standard that emerged across DeFi. Same thing with NFTs. Like there was the standard that we were all attracted to of an NFT. This is just a standard that exists in the space. And there was this massive light bulb moment across the space in what we can do with that and the ways in which it can interoperate. And I think that is the biggest missing piece with DAOs and DAO tools right now is that there's not a core underlying standard in which we're interoperating around right now. Like one could probably argue like the Governor Bravo contract or the governor contract is what we call it now. But as we know, that's a really limiting boundary to be putting around your organization. So I actually think it's like more about an interoperable standard that just hasn't been widely enough adopted. I have my takes on what that will be, but like I think that's when we'll start to see this velocity pick up in a way that we've seen with DeFi and NFTs.
I think speaking to that, like what do we need for DAOs to really take off, which will then, probably bring even more DAO tooling, which is great, is also probably a very clear in users' minds use case, right? We talk a lot about communities. We want to build communities. I think most people generally don't have time for communities, right? That's a hot take. That's a hot take. Most people don't have time for communities.
Can I say
right?
a hotter take?
Please.
That we should ban the word community.
Banned. We've banned the word community. But it's true. Like when we talk about like what are DAOs solving for most people, the answer still tends to be for most people nothing, right? Like, and that maybe that sounds painful, right? Like I run a DAO tooling project, so surely I can't believe that. But when you think about it, in my mind, when we talk about like internet native startups, I think about like, oh, well, people want to build businesses to make money. Right? Some people want things, they want to invest in things. Some people want to collect things. Along with a standard for the technology, I think we also need to kind of standardize what DAOs can do for you, right? Like why should you have a DAO in the first place, right? Because in most people's lives, maybe they're not immediately solving a problem. And the company I was working on before was a company called DApp Hero, which was this sort of like abstraction layer like Web3. And what we found is that people only really use the internet for like 4 different reasons. One is like entrepreneurship, vanity, or because they have to. And maybe there wasn't 4. Maybe it was just like 3 things, right? Maybe if you had a hardware story.
And the notepad. And
notepad, take notes, right? Well, email, right? Maybe to be in touch with people, right? You had to be on Google Maps for people to know that your store existed. You had to have a website if you wanted to sell stuff. And then if you were vain, you had some sort of gallery, and it cost you money, but it just sort of like somehow like stroked your ego, and that's like why you would have a web page or a presence on the internet, right? And I still can't see much more reason than that to be on the internet anyway. But when we think about DAOs, what are the reasons for people to have DAOs? And that speaks a lot to what sort of tooling do they need, right? Are they running a nightlife event, right? Is their DAO going to be the participants in their nightlife event? Well, the tooling that's around that is very different than like, oh, I want to make a DeFi protocol and don't want to go to jail for the US government. Clearly, that tooling is enormously different, right? So it really hovers around also, in my mind, for this like next successive wave, if there ever will be one. Maybe crypto's dead. But if it's not dead, right, like what are DAOs going to solve for people who participate in them? And that's going to dictate a bit more of the tooling. Because it's just not necessary to like token gate everything, right? Like, oh, you can't get on the bus unless you have this token, right? Like.
Okay, wait, question though. If there's only 3 reasons that we use the internet, why are our entire lives on the internet? And why are we becoming increasingly more digital as a population?
I think it's because we're vain, we need to make money, and somebody forced us to, right? Because otherwise we don't exist. Right? If you don't have email, you don't exist. You can't sign up for shit, right? You can't use anything. I don't know if folks here, I'm a little bit older, but if folks remember when cell phones first came out, right? At a certain point, you couldn't like go rent a movie without having like a cell phone or a credit card. Right? And these type of things sort of like eventually made it so that you couldn't live in our society anymore unless you had credit cards and cell phones and these type of things. So yeah, for the internet, I think it's maybe you could add to that like having fun, but since like Web 2.0 is actually about like monetizing you, I think that's actually kind of different than you having fun. Like you think you're having fun, it's like heroin where it's like feels really good, but like actually you're getting fucked. I don't know if I can say that. So. Yeah, I think it's just those 3 things. Right? But an enormous
DAOs,
world of tools support that.
So I think maybe something that I'm thinking about differently here, though, is that I have a much more expansive view of what DAOs are, which is, I think, more just like digitally native organizations.
You were about to say community.
No, I was not. Don't you dare put that word on me. And so I think it's the natural progression that we have to start bridging the physical ways in which our organizations and the bad C word start to bridge to our digital lives. Right. And I think that is just the natural progression in which like DAO tools are going.
I feel like maybe you're actually making a case for the skeuomorphic, it's like the Web 2 thing, but for DAOs.
Am I?
Yeah, maybe if people are bridging over, maybe it does make sense to like give them tools that look a little bit like the thing they already know.
But the problem is but the problem is the way in which Web 2 builds everything. And like, this was a big point that the Metropolis team made when we were talking about DAOs as digital cities. And Chase wrote like a beautiful, Chase Chapman, the one and only Chase.
She might be in the audience.
She is. She wrote the most beautiful article on thinking about DAOs as digital cities. And one of the points that she made was that the difference is that Web 2 is instantiated on borrowed land. And meaning like when you are porting your life into Facebook, like that is Facebook's domain and they own that part of your life, essentially. And we can't express the full dynamicism of our networks and the ways in which they overlap. Like if I wanted to pull my Facebook group and say, we are making this into a Telegram chat now and then we're raising money because we did this really cool idea and blah, 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 blah. That's not possible in Web 2 because of the ways in which these networks are captured and platform specific. And what we have the opportunity with in Web 3 is that we are building and instantiating our like lives and organizations and networks on like sovereign space, which is what like the blockchain as a technology enables. So I definitely don't think I'm making the case for Web 2 tools. I think it's that the natural progression is that our digital lives will be ever more connected with our physical lives, but that there are more scalable ways in which we can do that so that we're not like a cog to this machine, like you said, the heroin example.
Yeah, that's a pretty interesting point. Earlier in the DAO House workshop, Clubhouse was there, and they are actually building...
Today?
Yeah, today.
Oh, interesting.
And they are building like a DAO platform for their communities. They're basically trying to DAOify their communities.
The Clubhouse thing didn't work out.
Oh no, apparently it's working out really well. And maybe the Clubhouse person is in the room, I don't know. You said it in public, so it's not a secret, right? You said it in a workshop. And they were talking about how they want to take their groups of people and allow them to be DAOs natively on the platform using Moloch v3, right? So that people could invest in their groups that they're a member of and build these like very active groups there on the platform, right? And that's a pretty interesting example of Web 2 moving to Web 3 and building something that feels like a new kind of DAO tool, but also very skeuomorphic. It's like Clubhouse, but with Web 3, because it is, right? And that's pretty interesting. I suspect we'll see more of that. I mean, it was pretty disappointing to hear Snapchat, booted its entire Web3 team, which didn't really make sense to me. I felt like they would have had, after not selling, I thought they would have been like a little bit like long-term focused. But if you think about how like Instagram has enabled NFTs and NFTs are now on Twitter, you can kind of see that everyone, these Web 2 platforms, are starting to do something a little bit different. Like the business model is based on
But they're not doing the part that matters the most. And
Right,
they're not
well-
incentivized to do that.
Right, they're not incentivized to do that, but they do potentially see the future and think that they could do that too, right? Like, I wouldn't put it past a lot of builders thinking that, oh, we can like sell your data and tell you that it's decentralized at the same time, whether or not it actually is, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's certainly something that I could see like advertisements, like, with Meta, you can own your own data, and it's still free because we monetize you, but it's good, right? Like, you could imagine them selling that, and for the users, right, maybe this forms a new kind of DAO tool, and maybe even the DAO, one of the reasons why I think that DAOs are like, the word is so maybe overused, for me kind of hints to the fact that maybe one day the word's actually going to like disappear. Right? Like, we're just going to go back to like, oh yeah, I'm on my Facebook group, and we did a huge spaghetti dinner, and now everybody gets to rage quit their fucking money out of it, right? And we'll just be like, oh, that's like Moloch, how dare you, Facebook? Facebook will just be like, no, whatever. But they could do that, and maybe they'll onboard a lot of new users that way. And I actually, now that sounds very scary to me, but it feels very possible.
I feel like I'm just really bearish on Web 2 tools making the Web 3 push, because again, it's just not, they're not incentivized to do so. And it is directly, like, I think we're kind of seeing this play out with like OpenSea right now. Like OpenSea was completely closed doors, like they don't have like an open public protocol until recently with Seaport. And they're now trying to like back themselves into having like this open, interoperable like protocol that's available for anyone to use.
Do you consider OpenSea Web 2?
I mean,
you don't have to answer that. But that's kind of a crazy, I'm gonna let you off the hook there with that one, right? But imagine being OpenSea and potentially us sitting up here being like, oh, they're so Web 2. They must be like.
Well, think about how they've built things though. When you look at it against Zora, which is the like Web3 equivalent like of NFT marketplaces, the design choices they've made are completely different.
Right.
And but I also will credit with OpenSea is like they built the metadata standard for NFTs. So like, was that a positive contribution to the NFT space? Or was that like potentially negative that this big nasty beast that holds all your data hostage and has all these closed doors and closed APIs is the one that's creating those standards? Like.
But you do have to say, now this is good debate, sir. Like now you do have to say that OpenSea is more responsible for onboarding people to Web3 than maybe the vast majority of other projects of their vintage and later combined, right? Like certainly ordinary users know OpenSea and can use OpenSea easier than they know and use Zora, even though Zora is more aligned to like the place we're going.
Well, totally, and I think this is just trade-off that we're witnessing in real time. Like, I don't think we know the answer to that yet. Like, I mean, this is, you could make the OpenSea Zora debate right now, and which one is going to be like most valuable in the long term, or not even valuable in like what they the value they like take, but the value that they create. Like which one is more abundant in that sense? And I don't think we have an answer to that yet.
Here's a question for you. Do you think that the DAO tooling today is solving real problems?
I want to say no. I mean, I think that it's just really, we're still really early. And I think that, again, it comes back to like that bridge that I was talking about, is that we're still really stuck in like today's thing, or like what can I touch, what can I feel? Like users are really tactile like that. And I just don't think we yet have the infrastructure to bridge people to solving some of the core problems that exist. Like, I mean, I think this comes down, another framework we created within the Metropolis team is this idea of like trustware and socialware. Trustware being a, what is my definition of trustware? My definition of trustware is I'm blanking on my word, but it's essentially something that we are legitimizing through code and like through the blockchain. Socialware is something that we are legitimizing through social relationships and social policies and things that are just created. And that's like a big thing that we see within organizations is traditional organizations are full of socialware and over-indexing on the bureaucracy of socialware. What we're trying to move forward with I think on-chain organizations is use of trustware and starting to offboard these dependencies that we've put on individual people within organizations. And I think that's when we start to see things change in a really, really interesting way. Like the example I always come back to is like an amazing podcast I listened to from Planet Money, where they talk about productivity in the United States. And essentially over the last 100 years, productivity has just been like straight upwards. Like we have industrial revolution, we have computers, we have internet, we have all these things. But we also have like the corporate like revolution. And that like helped create a mass amount of like productivity and but what's really interesting is that in the last like 10 or so years, productivity has been completely plateaued, especially in corporations. Like, we are not becoming increasingly more productive as a workforce. This is in the United States specifically. And that's at a time when technology is at an all-time high. And I think it's really interesting because what are we actually instantiating in code? Like, is that actually becoming valuable to us anymore? And I think like that's where a lot of efforts are misdirected, is that we're sort of instantiating how we're like measuring people's performance. And like, is Dennison like doing his hours? Let's see. He's not. But I think that's where we start to see the unlocks in like solving legitimate problems and actually allowing us to work more productively and effectively and dynamically that we don't have at our disposal right now.
Hey, we just got our 5-minute warning there. Is there like 1 or 2 questions we can take in case there's something that we haven't covered that people are interested in? Because otherwise we just bounce.
Anyone got questions? Dennison's opening it up.
Got
Give
a
it a
question?
fiver.
So when it comes to DAO tooling, right, because obviously I'm sure there are many people here who are currently ideating or building ideas that could serve as DAOs. Can you talk about your ideal or recommended delivery mechanism? Meaning like, there's the software as a service model, meaning, hey, we just have a tool, go use it, figure it out yourself, versus, the more DAO-to-DAO partnership where a team is actually coming and helping you solve the problem. I've seen iteration amongst these models, so I'd love to get your thoughts on it.
The ideal delivery method, is that what you said? Okay, sorry.
Yeah, I don't know if the ideal delivery method exists, and maybe that's why there are so many DAO tools, because everyone's still trying to figure out, when we're all a collective and like we're working, to each their own, to what they put in and get out of it. Is there a business in our like digital communism? Maybe there isn't. I don't know. But it's a pretty good question that everyone's experimenting with.
I feel like it comes down to legibility, is like, we don't really have the topology of these organizations or like who we're even supposed to be talking to. Like, DAOs are this like really loose form, and I think that's like a big challenge with DAO tools today, is that it's very difficult to identify who the stakeholders we're actually supposed to be having conversations with. Whereas in like B2B SaaS, that's like a very clear playbook. Like, you go to the B and you figure out who the top exec is that you can get a conversation with, and then that single person implements it. It's a very different playbook with DAO tools, is not only needing like greater stakeholder adoption, I think, but also just even understanding the topology of the stakeholders that do exist, which is, I think, something I'm very excited to be working on at Metropolis.
With one more question?
Do we have one more?
There's one right there.
One more?
I see a hand.
All right. Here we go.
But maybe you needed the microphone to go on the live stream. I don't know if there's a live stream, but.
Cool. So, what do you think about on-chain versus off-chain? Like, there are some DAO tools that are building towards more and more things happening on-chain, which, with like L2s and stuff will become more possible over time. And then you have DAO tools that like mostly do stuff off-chain. So curious on your thoughts on like the direction of DAO tooling. Is it both? Is it one direction or the other?
I mean, I'm very opinionated about this.
Yeah?
Yeah.
I'm not so opinionated.
Really?
Yeah, I think it's 50-50.
Okay.
A lot of DAO tooling is actually just the social layer, right? Like, if you are a DAO that lives in Austin and every weekend you go out and you build a cabin in the nearby woods, a big part of your DAO structure is the social connective tissue there that may never exist on-chain. Whereas if you are, Tornado Cash, maybe there's a lot of it that you don't want to be on a social level at all, right? You prefer to have never met anyone else, and no one can ever be captured and tortured to reveal the other contributors, right? So I think it's very DAO dependent. So
I am very much an on-chain maxi. So I believe that like at least the most critical parts of the organization, or I guess, yeah, the most critical parts should be on chain, but I think it comes down to, I definitely don't think that like our day-to-day communication should be like on chain. Like there's definitely a limit to it. And Vitalik wrote like a really interesting piece that honestly was originally on like a technical discussion, I think, of like Merkle trees, which could not tell you about, but he did implement like an interesting strategy that I think applies to organizations and like on-chain versus off-chain, which is like systemic complexity versus like encapsulated complexity. That's the wording he used, which is like we don't need to port over the entire organization on chain. Like that's entirely unnecessary. But like we need to have like the core pillars that roll up in our organization on chain for that type of legibility and interoperability. And it's totally fine for like Dennison and my like bullshit communications, no offense, to be off chain. Like that definitely does not need to be instantiated there, but potentially like our relationality and the ways in which our organizations work together is absolutely something that should be pointed to on chain so that we can have richer experiences in the ways that we're building out these networks.
All right, guys, we are going to set you free. Give a hand for Julia and Dennison. Thank you so much. Hey, thank you guys for tuning in for day one of MCON. It's been great. There are a bunch of people hanging out on the lawn. Camp Chaos is, yes. Day one, and day two is tomorrow.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so tune in. We'll see you for day two. Head out to the lawn, WGMI Dodgeball. Food trucks are on a coma. Hit it up, enjoy, thank you.
Who's taking a picture?